All right. We will call the meeting to order and start with roll and approval of the minutes. Here.
Here. Plain. Here. Regent Barrett.
Here.
Regent Robinson.
Here.
Regent Teal.
Here.
Commissioner Stearns.
Here.
Governor Schweitzer is represented by Dan Villa. And I do not see Superintendent Denise Juneau yet.
Okay. The minutes have been posted. We have minutes from our August 2nd board meeting. Entertain a motion to approve those minutes.
So moved.
Regent Barrett, move the approval of the minutes as posted. Is there any changes or corrections to the minutes? Okay, all those in favor of approval signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Minutes are approved. We will start off with a welcome by our newly inaugurated in something, Mr. Grotze, Chancellor Grotze.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the board, and welcome to Montana State University Billings and to the Billings community. You probably heard enough from me yesterday, and so I want to just touch on a couple of things that I hope you'll have a chance to look at while you're here. I noticed that fall seems to be in the air this morning, and I'm not liking that. It's not due for another couple days. We have some posters out here in the foyer that depicts work that some of our faculty and students have been doing, and I hope you have a chance to stop and take a look at those. We're very proud of the work that our faculty and students do here, and I hope you'll get a chance to see those. As part of our first-year seminar classes, our students are required to participate in a service learning project. And in an effort to form a partnership between college students and some of the students at the Passages pre-release facility in our community, and as you know, we've done quite a bit of work in the women's prison and in participating and forming the Billings pre-release task force, reentry task force, and also at this pre-release facility. Our students and faculty engineered a project that would involve groups of MSU-B students and students at Passages, and they produced a documentary film using as a vehicle the book The Last Town on Earth, which was our one book for the university last fall. And I'd like to, just as a demonstration of some of the partnership work that we do in our community, just show you a few minutes of a documentary that was made on this project. So.
Voted. When that happens, we need. Did you log in okay? We all are a part of something larger than ourselves. Being in a democracy sometimes means we are outvoted. When that happens, we need to press on and trust that the decision the majority made was right. I know it's hard, but it's something each of us has to do.
Our democracy in the United States has been shaken to its core over the last decade by wars in Afghanistan and Iraq, economic recession, healthcare reform, and flu epidemics. College students will face these problems as they leave home to begin finding their place in the world and learn how to make the world a better place. The Last Town on Earth by author Thomas Mullen was selected as the book that all Montana State University Billings students read as they entered their freshman year. It was chosen as the 2009 Best Book of the Year by the Chicago Tribune. This touching, thought-provoking story chronicles the lives of the Worthy family in the lumber mill town of Commonwealth, Washington. This historical fiction novel, set in 1918 during World War I, examines the challenges of townspeople who quarantine their small town to protect themselves from the Spanish flu. In Commonwealth, a sense of duty to the community and desire to protect their families leads to ghastly violence. It is a story about making difficult choices, confusion, fear of the unknown, the heartache of lost love, and hope for a better future. In some ways, it is similar to the lives of undergraduates who make choices and face challenges as they enter a new community. But the story has even more in common with the lives of women incarcerated at Passages, a correctional institution just 1 mile from the MSU Billings campus. Sarah Keller, professor of communications, and Karen Henderson, writing instructor at MSU Billings, teamed up in the fall of 2010 to offer a service learning project. Their goal was to examine The Last Town on Earth in a joint book club with students and Passages residents, bringing these two unlikely groups together. The students weren't sure what women in prison would be like, women labeled felons who were awaiting their sentencing to treatment or prison. The book club was part of a program called Pathways to Self-Sufficiency that offers college-level courses and workforce training inside prison walls. In an effort to fit in with the women at Passages, Karen and the students wore drab colors and no makeup. Through the book, the group explored the question, what is community?
A lot of us are from different communities, and we're quarantined into one little hallway.
The positive attributes of communities were identified first: encouragement, responsibility, safety, and comfort, the balance between oneself and others.
I think the community, to me, especially here, is a place of healing and to encourage one another and lift each other up.
It's helping each other out and being neighborly and like helping people through their hard times and stuff.
There has to be unity, there has to be loyalty, responsibility.
Community is a place where you feel comfortable enough to be who you are, but yet private enough to where nobody steps into your private life behind your closed doors.
I'm living in the dorms, so like it really is a community. You have to share everything with everybody.
The importance of community is not just thinking of yourself, thinking of others, how your actions would respond to other people, how it would make them feel and affect them.
Well, there needs to be respect for a leader. There needs to be a strong leader.
I think personally in our community, a lot of integrity and respect for each other, having a little bit of humility. I think those are really good qualities.
So through a semester of working on this book club, this was a very powerful experience, both for the students who participated, as you might imagine, and for the inmates as well. What we're trying to do is show our students that as they come to the university, they're now entering a larger world that they are a part of, and it's our goal to show them through partnerships in the community just what some of the other parts of that world are. And as we endeavor to have a lasting effect on the community, these many kinds of partnerships will be explored. Again, welcome to MSU Billings. If there's anything we can do here, the setup for this meeting is very much like past meetings. We have kind of a green room over here with some snacks in it where you can retreat and have conversation, and the video of the meeting goes on in there. Mr. Chairman, while I have the floor, if you wouldn't mind, I would like to introduce two new staff members at MSU Billings. We've been fortunate over the course of the summer to hire two key new staff members, and I would like to first introduce Dr. Mark Pagano, who is our new provost. Mark comes to us from Purdue. We're very fortunate to have him, and he will begin in early October. And also Dr. Marcia Riley, who is the new Dean of the College of Technology. They are both here for this meeting. Marcia will actually begin next week, so welcome to them. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Chancellor Grothus, and thank you for hosting us here this week. We realize we come with a certain amount of burden. Thank you for taking this meeting on. I'd like to start with a welcome on our newest regent, who was appointed by the governor a few days ago, Joe Teal. Welcome, Joe, and if you'd like to say anything or tell us a little bit about what brings you here.
Well, thank you, Chairman Christian. No, I was appointed, to be exact, 2 Thursdays ago, so very recently, and I'm very excited to be here, very excited to be working with this board and with this university system. I'm from Montana State University Bozeman. I'm studying chemical engineering and liberal studies, and I'm very excited to be talking about all the things on our agenda today.
Thank you. Thank you, Regent Teal, and welcome. The other thing I would like to do, just starting off, a couple thank yous. Certainly thank you to Regent Bornpole, who's now left the board, and we appreciate her service as a student regent over the last year. And also Regent Hamilton, who has recently left the board. We appreciate her service of nearly 12 and a half years. Incredible run on the board, and for those of you wondering why she's not here, I would just simply say don't read too much into that. She very much enjoyed the time on the board. I had a good visit with her the other night, and she has done a tremendous amount I believe, for students in our system. She always was a voice. I think we all try to, but Lynn was always a very loud voice for what's best for the students, and we very much appreciate the service that she's contributed to the university system. Simply put, it just was sort of time. I think Sheila, myself, and others have tried to talk her off of this ledge for a while, and we were unsuccessful in that endeavor, but I get it. Volunteering for any sort of public service at a volunteer level, even though some people aren't completely convinced we volunteer, we certainly do. And 12 and a half years is a long time to do that, and we thank her for her service. I guess a couple other things or comments I'd like to make. Certainly, it's great to be back into the school year. Had the pleasure of now moving the third member of my family into the Montana University system. My middle daughter just started a career at Montana State and was very excited to do that and to get there. And I'm always impressed when I get to actually participate at that sort of level in the system, how well it operates. I now have a cat and a grizz, and I'm just always impressed what our system is able to accomplish. Move-in day in Bozeman was a workout for me, being in the peak of physical condition that I am, hauling everything up the stairs, but it was a great event. Faculty and staff helped participate in that, and it's just, we have an incredible system, and it's good to be part of it. So it's great to be back, and thank all of you for the hard work that you do for students every day. quick thing I want to do, and we're going to come back to this a little bit in the staff and comp meeting, but I certainly am getting some questions about where we are on the commissioner search, and want to take a few minutes to bring us up to speed on that. And then during the staff and comp meeting, we will have time for even public comment if there's faculty or students or staff that want to weigh in on the commissioner job and the job description. Where we're headed is recently signed an agreement with Greenwood Asher, who's a search consulting firm. Betty Asher herself, who's one of the principals in the firm, will be our lead consultant, and Betty herself will be here sort of walking us through this process as we search for the next commissioner. She has been a member, or Greenwood Asher has been around since the early 90s. Betty served as president at University of South Dakota, so she has some roots in our area of the country, and certainly some experience in systems around Montana. Prior to that, she was vice president for student affairs at Arizona State University. She actually worked, I'm told, with our very own Dr. Branch. So she has good connections to Montana. She recently completed the search for the Montana Tech Chancellor, which brought us Mr. Blackketter. So we're thinking that they're doing an excellent job. I think we've got an agreement worked out that meets the needs of the system and meets the requests that many of the regions had in terms of how it's structured. So I'm comfortable with what we did there. Appreciate Kathy Swift's efforts on that. So the search is moving forward. I think we have said somewhat before, but just want to make it very clear that the search committee itself will consist of the Montana Board of Regents. We are welcoming to the table our ex officio members as well, and we've discussed that we will also include Teresa Borenpole for some indefinite period of time as part of the search, just to give that continuity as we have a change in student regents happening right at the time we're sort of in the heart of this search. So that will be the search committee. That said, we absolutely value the opinions of all in this process, and we've worked with Betty to set up a schedule that will start in conjunction with our listening tours in mid-October. I think it's 11th, 12th, 13th, or something like that in Missoula, Billings, and Bozeman, and I believe in that order. We'll have listening sessions planned, and as part of those, Betty will attend, and we'll meet with, obviously, participate in the listening session, and we'll carve out some time in those to discuss the commissioner's job in particular and what it is we're looking for there. But also over that same period of time, meet with all the regents individually and the presidents, and we will start forming a basis that will become a prospectus. And once those meetings have been had, Betty will work on the prospectus, and we should have a draft of that out very soon, and we'll certainly post that and allow some comments on that. But that document will move forward. We'll post the job, and then we have sort of set into the plan where there will be an opportunity with, at least with finalists, for some sort of a tour-looking process to take place where campus and all those involved, faculty, staff, will have an opportunity to participate in that process as well. In the end, the final decision will be made by the voting members of the board, and we look to have that process move forward starting now, and we'll complete it as we can and work with Commissioner Stearns through the transition. But that's sort of where we're at and where we're headed, and like I said, we'll have some opportunity for comments about the process and even the position in itself in staff and comp later today. Any questions about the search? Okay. Well, then we are ready to move forward, and we can move on to the system issues that are listed on our agenda. And I believe, yeah, the man with two last names, or two first names, Mr. Trevor.
Mr. Chair, members of the board, good morning. I'm here to present to you our fifth edition of our system and campus-wide dashboard indicators. And Summer, if you can click on that link, what better way to start off a board meeting than diving straight into some data, with not only some data, but a spreadsheet. I'm going to talk about this, but first I wanted to remind the board about the dashboard indicators, the ones that we've covered, and why we're doing this. So far, since January, we've taken a look at college participation, retention, affordability measured through net tuition and net price, as well as low-income students measured by the percent of our student population that receive Pell Grants. And now we've moved on into completion productivity. This dashboard indicator that I have in front of you here is comprised of two basic measures. These two measures make up measures used nationally and often. For instance, the Delta Cost Project, which we've talked about, Dennis Jones and Lumina often use those data. Focus on these two measures. The first one being expenditures per completion, and the next completions per 100 FTE. And as we take a look at these, I just want to remind the board about the indicators, that's just what they are, indicators, and they need to be taken as a set, like you would on a dashboard, no different than if you were looking at your car or flying an airplane, which I don't do, but if I did, I would look at the gas, the elevation, the speed, and such. So that comes off a little remedial, but just as a kind of precautionary note that don't take any one of these singly, they need to be looked at in combination. So with that said, I'll talk about the expenditures per completion. It's the blue strip in the middle. What we're measuring there is we take our current unrestricted expenditures. That's another way of saying expenditures directly related to the funds we receive from the state and student tuition. And then we divide that by all of the completions within a campus. So, for instance, the University of Montana has completions that range from 1 year, 4-year graduate degrees, PhDs, professional degrees in law, and physical therapy and such. So that's the basic measure, and it's done for each campus, and I'll talk about some of the analysis here in a second. The one immediately to the right is completions per 100 FTE, and this is, again, all of the completions divided by our official annual FTE. So what's different? Why would I calculate this then? Why wouldn't we just let the Delta Cost Project bring this data to us? We can look at it from them and go forward. Well, anytime someone uses our data nationally, they go through IPEDS, our federal database, and there are complications in Montana. We have a lot of institutions. We have embedded COTs. We have they have to project FTE or calculate FTE where we have the exact amount. In any way, there are a lot of differences, and so that's prompted me to measure this from our office. So this is Montana homegrown data. We can point to the information in our operating budgets. We can point to the information directly back to our enrollment reports and do the math. So in the summary, well, let me start with the limitations first. This has received a lot of attention, so I want to point out right off the bat there are some limitations with this. The first being, if focusing on completions per 100 FTE, if you're a campus that recently has had a lot of growth within the last year, that's going to affect your denominator, your FTE, obviously, and those students may not have had enough time to get through the pipe, which in turn has not equally affected the numerator. So you may be kind of artificially lower. That's why we look at it over time, and that's why you'll always see a time series when I present this type of information. The second limitation is that ratios include the ratios do include completions from all award levels within an institution, and our institutions vary on the type of award levels that they have. So that's a cautionary note in when comparing campuses. It's best to look within one campus and compare it over time. Okay, with all that lead up, here's the short little analysis. And starting first with the completions per FTE, the gray area on the right, 7 out of our 11 campuses from 06 to 2010 saw a decline in completions per 100 FTE. And so that leads you to ask, well, what happened? You know, was this because completions went down, or enrollment increased faster than completions? And so you can see the different combinations you could have. And so I provide some little sub-bullets there to give a little bit more analysis on what's going on here. 2 of these that declined experienced growth in both enrollment and completions. And so those might fit into the category of where I noted those limitations and cautionary note. 3 experienced growth in enrollment and a decline in completions. 2 experienced declines in both enrollment and completions. So there you go. We always want to compare regionally to make sure that we have some sort of benchmark. I provide that, and a quick note about that 6 of our 11 campuses recorded completions per FTE above their equivalent regional comparator. Some of those may have been the ones that have gone down recently as well. So as any time that we get down into campus level data, there is a lot going on there. So I encourage you to take a look at this. And I should mention that I've attached to this, and I'm not going to show it, our detail of each one of these years. You can go in and see which degrees were awarded at which campus, the total amount of funds they had, their FTE, and basically see how the math occurred. Okay, the final point, and this now relates back to expenditures per completion. At all campuses, and I swear Joe Schaefer is not paying me to say this, except MSU, Great Falls COT, expenditures per completion increased from 06 to 2010. So put it in another way, Great Falls is the only one that decreased their expenditures per completion. And then I go on to state that it's increased 20% over time, and you're going to expect it to increase marginally. We have inflationary costs, but what's the relationship year after year between the total amount expended and the completions produced? And then you can see I've listed the campus with the greatest increases occurred. So that's a lot of information. There's a lot of detail related to this. I'd be glad to answer any questions here at the stand, or if you have any questions of me following this. Mr. Chair, that concludes my presentation.
Thank you, Mr. Trevor. Obviously, there's both factors in expenditure per completion, both what we expend and our completion rates. Is there a predominant factor amongst the blanket statement that all of has decreased, or no? It varies.
That all of them have increased? Increased. Yeah. Well, I think the predominant factor is the increase of expenditures. We've increased as a system in completions over that same period of time. Just not at the same rate.
Right. That's about as far into math as I can get. Any other questions? President Engstrom.
Mr. Chair, Tyler, let me just probe that a little bit further. Tyler, so the 20% overall increase in expenditures per completion, you said one of the factors would be increased enrollment where students have entered the system but maybe over this time period have not yet graduated. Can you estimate out of that 20% about how much is attributable to that enrollment but not yet graduated component?
Mr. Chair, President Engstrom, no, I can't. That statement I made mainly relates to the completions per 100 FTE because we have the actual enrollment in the denominator. I guess that you'd have to go back to why your expenditures increased because of the increase in enrollment and that relationship there. And I'm sure that's part of it. Our expenditures increased because we have more students on our campus, and some of those students haven't made it through the pipe yet. So this is one of those metrics where we need to keep going year after year after year. But sooner or later, when you hit so many years, you can start to develop a conclusion or a trend.
President Engstrom. And Tyler, another question, then, if I could. On the other page that you had, you showed the WICHE comparisons.
Yep.
Could you just comment a little bit on how our system operates in this parameter with respect to WICHE comparisons?
Well, and on your first page, there's a summary of those at the bottom as well. So if you take a look at the 2-year average on, I'll start from right to left, and that means in completions per 100 FTE. The 2-year WICHE average most recently is 17.3 completions per 100 FTE. And if you look through our campuses, we do pretty well in comparison to that 2-year average. We have most of our 2-year, for instance, just take a look at all of the community colleges. All of them, well, Flathead in this instance is not above the WICHE average, although Brad Eldridge will tell me that they're at 18.9 now. I mean, this is sort of the attention we're getting to this. People are going back to their campus and measuring it into the most current year. So you can kind of do that analysis for yourself at our 4-year campuses compared to the BA, MA, WICHE average in completions per 100. We're pretty good. We're quite a bit lower at the doctoral compared to our comparators. I guess we'd have to explore what are some of the reasons for that. But the completions per FTE at both MSU Bozeman and UM Missoula are very similar and have been very consistent over time. So that's about as much analysis as I can give in a summary.
If I may,
Commissioner Stearns.
I guess President Engstrom and Mr. Trevor, would you say then that it would be advantageous for the board to look at this again, this dashboard indicator, 1 year from now or 2 years from now? Because over time, obviously we want assurance that quality is being maintained, that, completion and productivity is not an end in itself, and that campus presidents, chancellors, and deans get a chance, even right now, frankly, to reflect out loud. I mean, I really think this is a good time for any campus leader to wave their hand and comment or raise a question, because would it not be wise, whether it's 1 year from now, to revisit it, to say after people, including the board, have had a chance to absorb a bit, and then to see how it's developing and what they're learning from it that's positive or so forth. Have you and the committee of folks who work on this kind of thing given thought to that? And I would welcome comments from campus leaders.
Well, Mr. Chair, Commissioner, I'll comment first, and it may not be the consensus of a committee, but definitely the opinion of myself, and that is we have to measure it. It's going to be measured nationally. It's going to be used in various documents in Montana, and the Montana University system is going to be reflected in comparison to other states. There's issues with that data nationally. We need to know what it is, whether or not we find this the most useful metric in the world or not. I think we need to continue to measure, and it's just one of those measures that needs to be repeated over time before you start to internalize it. But I could see where this expenditures per completion might be a budget metric. We do expenditures per FTE, and completions are our goal of increasing them. It seems like that would be a useful metric. Completions per 100 FTE, just a relative measure of how many completions you produce to the number of students enrolled, is a consideration when we talk about performance-based funding. When efficiency is one of the goals of the board stated in the strategic plan, it's definitely one of those metrics we're taking a look at in terms of performance-based funding. So I think these two measures, I'm excited about them. I like it.
Mr. Trevor, is there any way, the point that President Engstrom brings up is certainly a valid one in this time, and I agree with your statement, over time you'll find a trend, but we certainly have had in the last 3 years, 4 years, a pretty tremendous enrollment spike. Is there a way to flatten that out? I mean, in economic terms, people go back to uninflated dollars or something that creates a flatness, because I think it is hard to tell with what's happened in the enrollment spike. Is that possible in the data, or can you manipulate it that way?
Mr. Chair, well, we definitely could do it to the expenditures, to take constant dollars and apply them backwards. And that's been done. I believe it's as part of the Delta Cost Project, one of the ways that they measure it. I just went with the most simplistic measure first here, but that would help because expenditures increase logically because we've got more students. Of course, inflation's occurring, but we know that part of that is part and partial to increased enrollment. So that could be taken into consideration. And I think just looking at the enrollment trends themselves, I think if you had the time to look at the detail on the pages that follow this, you can start to get an idea of the increases in completions that are happening. That's a reflection of an increase in our increased enrollment, you'd think. So the answer is yes and no. Yes to a degree. I believe we can fine-tune this a couple different ways that may be more useful. When you get into using constant dollars and not use, it's we don't use that when we do expenditures per FTE. So it's just
and I'm not sure we should in that measure because dollars are inflating. I mean, that's certainly a factor that we need to consider. Yeah. It's an interesting phenomenon with the growth that we've seen. I mean, there's some 2-year students that could have matriculated through by now, but there's 4-year students couldn't have in the time that we've seen the enrollment spike.
But I would say it's not the same at all campuses. So that would lead you to think some campuses are doing something different.
Right. Chancellor Blackketter.
Well, I was going to respond to the context and support Mr. Trevor's comments on that. When we recalculate our FY11 numbers, they're back where they were the previous 2 years. There is some good news in some cases where your enrollment is increasing rapidly at the incoming, like it did at Montana Tech, and you're graduating a smaller class. I mean, if you go to the extreme, if you had 1 student 5 years ago and 10,000 students today, right, then your number would look very, very large. The other thing that needs to be done is comparisons to peer. I know the WICHE average, a little self-serving, but Montana Tech, of course, is 40% plus engineering students when we compare ourselves to Colorado School of Mines, South Dakota School of Mines, Rolla, New Mexico Tech. We're at or below those kinds of peer averages for schools with 50% engineering enrollments, which are traditionally more expensive. So I think there is a lot of context when you look at that and important to consider.
Mm-hmm. Chancellor Grossa.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Tyler, I wonder as these measures gain prominence on the national scene, to what extent are we going to confuse ourselves by using different data than what goes through iPads, because we're going to be measured in some national circles, probably on iPads data, and how are we going to reconcile that?
Mr. Chair, Chancellor Grosef, I can only agree with that, with your statement. It is confusing, and that's part of the problem with it. The more you know about the data, the more confusing it is, because you can see that there's issues, and there's pretty prominent issues. When you, for instance, with a small campus like Dawson, iPads does not, we don't report FTE to iPads, so it's calculated. And so the formula that they use, when it's off just a little bit at Dawson, and that's the denominator, it grossly affects the completions per FTE. So it's got to be a national issue, but I think it's particularly an issue for Montana because we have such small campuses and we have the integrated COTs, and the structure at which iPads holds data is not conducive to those integrated COTs. So and that's why I presented it like this, and I purposely didn't put the MUS data into 2-year, 4-year, and doctoral, because basically I can't. I mean, we have 1-year completions at a doctoral. I have to just let that stand on its own.
Regent Teal.
Yeah, Mr. Trevor, I was kind of wondering about a similar problem. Is there a way in this data that you can weight it so that it reflects the type of degrees earned? Because otherwise, it is difficult to compare it across campuses. And especially when it's being used as a performance-based measure, it seems like that would be an important capability.
Mr. Chair and Regent Thiel. Thiel. That's the last time I'll do that. Yeah, I thought about that a lot. And I think we need to take a look at that. And it's partially with our integrated COTs being able to identify the expenditures that are just related to that integrated COT. But that's a difficult thing to do because they're integrated. You know, so where's the time for the registrar separated out between the COT and the main campus? It's just the way. When I was going through these, it kind of dawns on you. That's just the way our institutions are. That's the fabric of our institutions. There's other states that are like us, but when you look at the doctoral numbers, for instance, nationally, UM has one-year certificates in there. So, you know, I don't know, I guess is the answer. I struggle with it. I think it's something that we as a system need to figure out. If that's what we want to measure, and we want to separate out those lengths of degrees, we need to be able to identify the expenditures that are related to them.
President Karras.
Mr. Chairman, members of the board, the other thing for two-year colleges I would encourage you to consider, and I know Tyler knows this, is to look at the transferability issue, because so many of our students transfer without completing, and that is one of the challenges in Montana, because many students don't see the value to receiving an Associate of Arts or Associate of Science degree, because there is no reason for them to necessarily complete that degree to be able to transfer seamlessly to the university system. So many of our students transfer without completing that degree. They may even have almost all the credits. They transfer and they don't show on the completion metric. So it would be helpful to get a full picture for community colleges and the colleges of technology to look at that as well.
Commissioner Stearns.
I'll just follow up on President Karras' question. You're very much a leader in AAC&U and the community colleges nationally. Wouldn't the data for the West that shows that our community colleges are pretty similar to other community colleges, wouldn't that fact of a lot of folks, not necessarily even nationally, seeing the need to complete a degree be characteristic of our community colleges as well as those nationally that we're looking at and comparing to?
Well, Commissioner Stearns, Mr. Chairman, members of the board, there is a group called the Volunteer Framework of Accountability that has been going on through AACC that's looking at different measures to look at how to reliably and accurately measure success for community college students and to hold community colleges accountable. And we've actually been one of the pilot institutions in that process, and Brad Eldridge has been very involved in that. And that group has made some recommendations to AACC, and they'll be working with the U.S. Department of Education on coming up with measures for community colleges and two-year colleges.
Good, thank you.
Any other comments or questions? And we will move on to the, we have a resolution for, read it right here. American Indian Heritage Day. Commissioner Stearns, do you want to address this? And then we don't have it as an action item, but in the past we have, in fact, voted to resolve.
Right. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I do recommend that the board, at the end of any comments or questions that they have, to vote in favor of this. I recommend you're voting in favor of this resolution, and that American Indian Heritage Day for September 23rd. It seems like every year we're either on the Butte or Bozeman campuses, either on or very close to that day, and we often encounter and are privileged to participate in celebrations of American Indian Heritage Day on those campuses. But I do know from watching your campus reports that those celebrations and cultural events take place on the other campuses as well. I do think it's a good thing that each year we, as a board, acknowledge this and that we make sure and commend the campuses and their students for participating and recognizing this event. So if any campus wants to comment because of their particular engagement in this issue before we vote, I'm sure it's something everyone's in favor of, but we put it on here to make sure that we're all well aware of it and enthusiastic supporters of the efforts of the campuses.
Any comments? Regent Robinson.
Mr. Chairman, I'm very much in support of this letter going out. I think it goes a long way to acknowledge the importance of American Indian culture here in Montana, and I think that's something that most of us here already acknowledge on a daily basis, but I think it's a good idea to recognize this particular day and this week. One comment I'd like to make is that where it references in the second paragraph Montana's American Indian history and culture, I would just like to amend that to read, it is important to acknowledge the importance of American Indian history and culture in Montana. I'm not for the possessive portion of that, and I think it's just a point that I continue to make, that Indian nations stand on their own. They're a sovereign nation. They're not possessed by any entity. So just the same way that Montana is a sovereign nation, sovereign state. Thank you.
Perfect. Any other comments? Then I would...
Chancellor.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just wanted to inform the board that at MSU Northern, we are celebrating and honoring this week, and we have a particular focus on the Hagner collection, which is at MSU Northern, which is an incredible collection of artifacts, and we have had tours scheduled for that yesterday and today, and I understand it's going very well. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Chancellor. Any other comments? I would entertain a motion then to move this resolution forward as Bishop McLean as amended, or proposed amended language. We'll get that corrected before it goes out. Is there any other comments on this before we vote? All those in favor to support the resolution for American Indian Heritage Day signify by saying aye.
Aye. Aye.
All those opposed? The resolution passes. We have some campus reports, and I think Commissioner Stearns has a few other things to touch on. Commissioner Stearns.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I would like to commend the campuses again for their campus reports. It is a pleasure to read them as they come in. I always look for something I would particularly like to call attention to. I guess I would give a special kudos this time to the University of Montana Helena. If you were to click on that and look down, I would guess that at least half of its bullets are so student-focused. Look down there toward the middle or the bottom. I don't know if they can make the print a little larger or not. Probably not. But the amount of projects, for example, toward the bottom, over the course of the past academic year, 463 students using the Learning Center, the numbers of tutors, the growth in service to disability services. It doesn't exactly state it in here, but implied in there is the growth in the advising and tutoring and financial literacy services. In other words, I do know from talking with all the chancellors and deans and presidents that the amount of focus from the campuses on student success, on everything from financial literacy to one-stop enrollment and advising services, the stories the campuses have to tell on an issue that is very high on the board's priority list from all that I've heard. They're very good stories. And UM Helena, particularly in this campus report, focused on several of those. They're not necessarily comparative. And I think they're simply illustrative, but a good illustration. And having visited for example, the Access to Success program and the rearranging on that campus and others to be student-friendly, I just thought was well worth noting. I will also note I would like to congratulate the many faculty who are listed in the various campus reports for the awards, the incredible many national and international awards they've received. So sometimes I think it's as busy as we all are to get ready for these meetings, we may skim over the campus reports fairly quickly, but there are some wonderful gems literally embedded in those reports of the success of what they're doing. If I may, Mr. Chair, when you spoke earlier about having a freshman student and helping her move into Montana State University Bozeman, our staff, the Office of the Commissioner, has an individual who has worked for us in the fiscal area, Lori Niels, since before a young woman was born who enrolled a couple weeks ago here at Montana State University Billings. And I remember going to a Regents meeting once and finding out that her mom was expecting and looking at her and said, and she already knew it was a girl, and Lori is just red-haired and Irish, and I said, oh, then I'm sure you'll name that girl Bridget. Well, darned if she didn't do that. So I feel like I helped name Bridget, and she just enrolled here at Montana State University Billings a couple weeks ago, and Jane Karras and I managed to track her down because we've known her since before she was born, and it was just delightful, Chancellor Groseth, to hear how much she likes her classes, her roommates, and the way that you have built, for example, the leadership opportunity. Bridget said, I looked at that, and I just went to a leadership camp this last week because MSU Billings is trying to, form a cadre of students who will step right into leadership role. Jane's already nominated Bridget to be a student regent a couple years from now, or one of those group in that class. So I just wanted to comment, in all of our units, people have helped students move in, and I don't know, I guess I could ask Dr. Moore, but I think we have heard just almost zero complaints from families and students. The welcome that they're getting would do you proud, members of the board. I know that it's what you expect, and that campuses think it's just a matter of course, so they don't brag about it very often, so I want to brag for them. The other thing I would like to mention under then going from campus reports just to other is a little comment at this point, because I'll give you a more complete report at the November meeting, and along the way are the listening sessions that we have started. I would like to extend my thanks to Dawson and Miles and Chief Dull-Knife College and Little Bighorn College, and let's see, Montana Tech and University of Montana Western for the helping to host and publicize the listening sessions we've had thus far. And others can comment at a future time at the good feedback that we're getting there in terms of qualities and considerations in the search for a new commissioner. But we're also, at least 2/3 of every session deal with other aspects of change, the value of the graduate mission, the value of College Now, and the increasing emphasis on College Now. It's the success of that effort to really uncover the need for community college mission throughout the state. So we're getting a lot of great feedback. The one I sent you a message on the last week was just a taste, but that came from Sydney, where we don't have a campus, but where we have outreach. President Cargill attended with me, and several legislators. You think, several legislators in Sydney? But yes, every legislator they have in a 50-mile area was there, because Sydney is desperate for workforce and educational outreach. And Dawson and Miles and, frankly, MSU Billings, Rolf has co-chaired a group, Chancellor Groseth, that's working on extending educational services, because they have, unemployment is not their problem in Sydney, but they do have workforce needs, and they have long-term needs. If oil patch, as they now project, lasts for 15 to 20 years, or maybe, I don't know, perhaps Mr. Villa has a better sense of that than I do, but it looks pretty sustainable out there, we will need to think broadly, members of the board. It's one of the things I certainly picked up at that listening session, that we have to be creative and innovative in terms of serving educational needs that are really different from somewhere from the Bitterroot to Richland County. So those are just a couple of observations. I would also note that yesterday the Montana College Access Network has been meeting, and that's a network of professionals from all of our campuses and some non-campuses of how you reach out in a coordinated way, all the different little resources we can bring, scholarships and so forth, to particularly low-income and first-generation potential college students who right now feel like they can't do it. They can't get there, or if they get there, that they can't succeed. So I want to commend the MCAN, the Montana College Access Network. I had a chance Monday evening just to go to part of their meeting. They're representing from tribal colleges and all over the state, and there are people in the trenches that would, again, do you proud, that I think we sometimes overlook. They're donating their time. The person I sat next to at this meeting was Amy Verlanick who's on the teaches in Anaconda and is on the school board there, who is one of the champions of this. So under other, Mr. Chair and members of the board, there is an incredible reservoir of effort and passion toward increasing Montana's educational attainment level at all income levels, at all opportunity, potential. And I think it's pretty terrific. I'm proud to be part of it. Thank you.
We are too. Thank you, Commissioner Stearns. I think we're ready to move to committee reports. Before we do, I would like to just mention and thank Michael Ballard and his group from KUSM and Public Broadcast for being here and helping us to stream the video across the internet. It certainly is an outreach effort by us to make these meetings more accessible and attendable by a larger group, and hope all are finding that useful. So thank you for being here, and I think we'll move right into the committee. I guess Regent McLean, when you see fit, we could take a break, but I think we might as well get started and then break when you want.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chair. Okay, we have before us items A through G for the consent agenda. Are there any items that members of the committee would like to see pulled? Then we will move that forward to tomorrow. The first action item we have is the construction of the new residence hall and the renovation of existing halls. And with that, then, if we could have Terry Least visit with us a little bit more about that.
Good morning, Madam Chair and members of the committee. I do have a few slides, but before I get started, I'd like to introduce Steve Clark, who is our financial advisor, and if it's okay with you, I'd allow him to say a few words before I get started. Thank you.
Thank you, Regents. I appreciate the opportunity to continue to serve as the financial advisor to Montana State University since 1991, and it's been a real pleasure to watch the university continue to develop a really strong financial base. They have a relatively limited amount of debt compared to its peers, and the debt is well managed. It's had an interest rate well below 5% for a number of years. There is one swap outstanding that is very well managed and has had an oversight committee meeting since the university obtained approval from the Board of Regents in 2003 to use a variable rate in a swap instrument, and even through the 08-09 times that was managed and has actually proven to be a lower cost of capital than the Student Union Hall in 2005 would have been if it was a fixed rate by about 80 basis points, say almost 1%. So this should be a very straightforward bond issue, $15 million for housing. It fits in with a long-term future plan of renovations down the road, and the MSU team have a very good handle on it. So I'll be happy to answer questions on the market. It's great, continues to get better. We're better than where we were in August, which was really low when we first started planning the actual final structure.
Anyone have any questions? Thank you.
Thank you, Steve. So I do have a few slides today, and we are very excited about this project. Certainly, if you've been on our campus, you'll recognize that most of our residence halls were probably built in the 60s and early 70s and haven't been updated much since that time. When President Cruzado arrived, we were just wrapping up a committee that had been formed a couple years ago to look at the student housing on the MSU Bozeman campus. And if we could go to the next slide, please. There were essentially three things that did come out of that. Were that we wanted our freshmen to remain, have a live-in requirement on campus, because we do believe in the power of student success and retention by having them be on campus that first year. Certainly the facilities were outdated and didn't meet the expectations of our students and parents. And I just finished up the 6th year that I've helped students move in on move-in day. And we, not only have parents, but we have grandparents that say, this is exactly the way it was when I was here. So they certainly have some nostalgia, but they need some updating, and certainly our students look forward to some improvements. Again, the high occupancy rates and the demand for more single rooms, et cetera, which we're, in the current enrollment environment, not able to offer as much of those single rooms as we used to. Currently, we're managing our, at the bottom of this slide, we're managing our current enrollment in high occupancy by, again, having fewer single rooms, and we have 158 students in family and graduate housing apartments. So we're displacing some of those folks that could live there into off-campus housing so we can house our residents, freshmen, on campus. So this graph just historically shows, the residence hall. It does not include family and graduate housing. And if you look at 2006, fall of 2006, that number of 2850 compared to the yellow bar there for the fall of 11, we're at 3268 currently. So we're up 416 students. And again, talking to our auxiliaries director, and really the housing optimal number is probably right around that 2850 number, so that we can accommodate the number of single rooms that students want, as well as have capacity for our graduate and family housing, et cetera. So again, we're up 400 over just the previous high of 2006. As you read in the board item, this proposal is to add additional bed space, 70 beds in a new facility. It's very similar to two suite-style residence halls that we built back in 1998. Update some common areas and the restrooms, and implement some energy efficiency and address some maintenance issues. So this is an example, a very common example, of existing common areas in our residence halls. The two that are being addressed specifically with this item are Hapner and Langford halls. And the next slide will show a picture of North Hedges, which was done about 13 years ago. And you can see it's still quite contemporary and had a big impact on students that wanted to be in that particular hall. The next slide is just an outside picture of the proposed suite-style residence hall. Again, this is one of the two that were built back, finished up in 1998. So the current debt, again, was from the early mid-90s. Again, for these two family and graduate, two suite styles in the family and graduate housing complex. The Student Housing Committee had recommended a short life cycle to minimize the debt interest costs. And so right now we're proposing a 16-year, which would wrap everything up by 2028. And again, it's a $15 million project. We're asking for $16 million to cover issuance costs, et cetera. Right now, we don't know if we're going to need bond insurance or not, but if so, that increases the cost a little bit. And certainly a debt reserve, debt service reserve, if we think that the market would give us a better rate or a better bond offering. With that, we would pursue that. we expect the total interest cost to be, as Steve said, the market for interest rates right now are still very good, less than 4.75, current rates just maybe slightly over 4%. So the actual repayment of the debt would be $750,000 a year from this year through FY 2022. Certainly that first bullet point on the net revenues was done through the Housing Committee. That was really before we've seen this last couple of years of growth. So we feel that's a conservative number, $210,000 with additional revenues from the housing complex through the enrollment increases. A 1% increase in the room and board rates. Last May when we brought our rates to you, we had anticipated this. We did not include it because we didn't want to raise the rates if the item was not approved. But students support this. Our Resident Hall Association has issued us a letter in full support of this 1% increase. That's about $40 per semester for the student living on campus. And certainly the last item, the cost containment in the housing operation and some reallocation of other costs would save about $320,000 annually, which would also be contributed toward this debt payment. Then when the existing debt falls off, currently that's about $2.5 million a year that the housing unit is contributing. In 2023, that would be picked up and applied toward this new debt, and in that way it would be wrapped up again by 2028. Actually, it's the November of 2027, but the fiscal year is 2028. All right, I think that is it. I'm happy to answer any questions that you might have. I certainly want to thank Laura Humberger and many other folks on our campus that have, and outside of our campus, Bond Council and Steve and the folks at Wells Fargo that have helped us get to this point. Again, I want to answer any questions that you might have.
Thank you, Terry. Are there questions or comments from members of the board? Chair Christian.
Terry, there's no, you mentioned the existing debt a couple times, but you're not refinancing any debt in this new bond issue. It's all, it's new money.
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, this is new money. That's correct. No refinancing in this piece. We did look at that, but the interest rates that we have on our existing debt, it just doesn't make it worth our while.
That was the next question, so thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you. Other questions? Regent Barrett.
Yeah, thank you. Just a comment. I looked at this pretty carefully and pretty pleased to see it go. And just two other pieces of information. One of the advantages of happening to live in Bozeman is you can, any place you go into a business or restaurant, anything you do, you're probably going to be interacting with the students. So you can have a focus group every place you go. And so I have queried a number of them about housing and how it fits, and the opinion is pretty unanimous that there's an overwhelming need. And interesting also from the people who should be living in family and graduate housing who can't live there because we have a requirement that freshmen live there. And then finally, not exactly part of this, but I think indicative of what the need is, there was an article in the Bozeman paper just within the last week that there's going to be a major private housing development for students just south of the campus. They see the need and have gone through a long process with the city. So with their own dollars, they're voting to say they see the enrollments and things going too. So I think, and I know the people who are involved, they did commissioned a lot of very serious studies. So I think that we can get some comfort in that the need will continue to grow.
Thank you. Any other members of the board have questions? Regent Buchanan.
Assuming this financing gets approved, what's the timeline for the project for start and completion?
Well, the completion time is over the next 36 months. It will depend on finishing up the design process. The bonds will go out in November is our target, and then as soon as we can get construction started, we will do so, to be wrapped up within 3 years at the very latest.
Thank you.
Yes.
President Cruzado?
Sure. Mr. Chair and Regent McLean, I want to thank you for allowing us to bring this to your attention. Needless to say, I think that the board is taking a look at this project as another opportunity that we will have to enhance student learning, retention, and success. The emphasis nowadays on learning communities, as we were discussing this morning over breakfast, it's absolutely overwhelming. The fact that we are talking not only about adding additional beds, but that those new structures will reflect the new configuration that would enable additional communication among the students, the faculty, the instructors, the staff, in an environment that will be very conducive to learning, not only about what's going on in the classroom and in the research lab, but also about life in general and providing our students with the tools to be not only great professionals, but also very good citizens and leaders in our communities. I needed to say that when I first arrived and I toured our residence halls, and I found the furniture that was 50 years old. There's nothing bad with that age. I just need to clarify. Actually, I think it's a very dignified thing. But we were confronting severe limitations with our showers, with basic elements of things that perhaps were okay when I went to school, but certainly our students deserve much better. So finally, the financial component is absolutely key. And I think that the institution is in very solid financial ground to adopt this. We have discussed with our students. Terry mentioned the Association of Student Residents strongly endorsed this project. Last week, Terry made a presentation at our ASMSU Student Senate, and it received a unanimous vote of approval. So I feel very confident that we do have the necessary stability in our finances. Our predictions for student enrollments look solid and very promising. And again, I strongly encourage the regents to take a strong look at this. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Regent Robinson.
Regent McLean, I had two questions regarding this. One is, I'm sure that the price of the project has been determined by the design that's been completed so far, and I was wondering where it's at in which phase and which stage.
Madam Chair and Regent Robinson, it's my understanding we're still wrapping up the design phase, which was approved, I believe, last year. And we have two buildings. The biggest piece of this is $7 million for the new suite style, which we built some time ago. But again, these are based on our recent estimates. We still would need to go out to bid on those to verify. So these aren't exact numbers, but these are our best estimates at the time. The $6 million is $3.5 for the renovations. Is $3.5 million for Hapner Hall and $2.5 million for Langford. Again, those are renovations which our folks probably have a little better handle on than maybe new construction. And the $2 million remaining is whatever we can get done with that for maintenance items, as well as energy efficiency issues.
In the largest project, though, as far as the $15 million project?
That's the total. $7 million for the new 70-bed facility, $6 million for the renovations of the two existing halls, okay, and $2 million for the energy savings and maintenance issues.
Okay. And so being comfortable with that cost then for the entire amount, it sounds like you want to make sure that if there are any cost overruns, that you at least have additional funds, it looks like, that you're asking for to be bonded. I guess my question is, if it sounds like you're comfortable with it, what I'd like to see is when you're reporting on this and as it moves forward, that obviously the management is very important, and it would be nice to know that there isn't a need to use that additional funding, and that they're actually under budget in this. So I think that's the other part of it. There's certainly a need, but there's concern about taking on more debt in this particular climate. And so I think it's really important that we are managing every single dollar as you see the project go forward.
Thank you. Regent Teal.
Yes, thank you. Chairman and Regent McLean. I also, as with Regent Barrett, talked with lots of students about this. I was at the ASMSU Senate meeting where it was presented, and I also had a personal discussion with the Director of Auxiliaries. And again, I think that students are excited to see new things happening with the residence halls. They're excited to see this sort of renovation. I think it's something that's a long time coming, especially with the surge in enrollment. And talking with auxiliaries and talking with Mr. Least, I'm very comfortable that they have a pretty good plan going forward with how they're going to handle the debt. So.
Thank you. Thank you. And Kathy Swift presented the regents with the packet on the bonds, if anyone would like to take a look at it today or tonight. So just so you know that we have that. Mr. Robinson, would you like to make a comment?
Yes, Madam Chair, members of the committee. As you remember, this particular project, I think, first surfaced about a year ago, and we have certainly had a lot of ongoing discussions. It came to the board as an information piece, and then looking for approval of design money back in the May meeting. So it's been in front of you a number of times, and we've been having lots of discussions going back and forth with our office and the campus. I think they've done a great job of moving this project forward and spending the amount of time necessary in putting together the financing and ability to satisfy that debt service as it moves forward. So we would certainly strongly recommend approval of this item.
Regent Christian.
I do have one more question, and I'm not really suggesting that we take on a whole lot more debt or expand this, but I'm just curious because you have a repayment stream that runs into 2023 and then steps up into 2028, and that I mean, there's a lot of difficult reasons to take on debt in this economy, but it's also a pretty good time to take on debt in terms of rate and availability of capital. But I mean, you guys feel comfortable that the scope of the project is sufficient enough to get you out into that time frame? So I know there's a lot of deferred maintenance needs, but are you addressing at least a bulk of them that you feel like get you in pretty good shape to last through that window?
Yes, Madam Chair, Regent Christian, in addition to the debt that we're taking on, certainly every year, just the net operating revenues from the auxiliaries operation, we do plow, $200,000-300,000 and more when we can back into maintenance items into the residence halls. So we're constantly working on that. Again, based on our debt ratings and our revenue projections, certainly we've been conservative, not counting that enrollment's going to continue. We've got no intentions of backing off on our recruiting plans and things like that, but nonetheless, we have taken a very conservative approach with this and feel very comfortable with that. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other comments or questions from members of the board? Any public comment? Thank you, Mr. Chair. Then if it is the will of the committee, this will move forward until tomorrow. Okay, thank you, Mr. Least.
Thank you.
And now on to item B, the authorization of COT street resurfacing MSU Billings. And if I could turn to Chancellor Groseth for a brief overview on this.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Our ingress and egress from the College of Technology is kind of a single in and out surfacing, and we are attempting to repair really original equipment surfacing on our parking lots and driveways, and also to set the stage for future growth in terms of the potential for future buildings. But this is really taking care of what we have, and we have some additional authority and would like to authorize, we have some additional expense and would like to authorize some additional authority on this project. These are to be done with a combination of non-state funds from building fees and auxiliary operation revenues.
Thank you. Are there questions for Mr. Grothseth from members of the board? Thank you. Any public comment? Then if it's the will of the committee, this will move forward to tomorrow. On to item C, authorization to renovate IT metals and authorize to include reverted appropriation and funding at UM Western. If we could visit with Chancellor Story for a brief overview on this one.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I did hear brief. This is really an exciting project for us, and I want to give credit to the model of efficiency and strategic planning to Vice Chancellor Susan Briggs. There's Susan back there, that she's really made this work. We're excited because it will help us continue to significantly improve what we do in terms of the arts with our students. This is the old College Motor building. It's been IT Metals. It's across from Sparky's Restaurant in Dillon. It's not a particularly attractive building right now, but we have an opportunity to do this because we have the cooperative program with our friends at Helena. So our IT education program, which was housed here, is now being offered in the Helena campus. It allowed us to take advantage of the remodeling in Main Hall and move things into this building that will significantly increase our ability to offer great art classes to our students. It increases the safety of the building, which has been a concern in the past, the safety of the kilns and the furnaces and all of the things that go along with that. So we're very excited. We've got the money to do it, and our campus is very pleased.
Thank you, Chancellor Story. Are there questions or comments from members of the board? All right. Is there any public comment? Okay, then if it's the will of the committee, then this too will move forward to tomorrow. Thank you, Chancellor Story. On to item D, an off-campus lease for extension housing. So for this, then I'll turn to Mr. Robinson.
Madam Chair, members of the committee, this particular lease probably could have just as well gone on the consent agenda, but we received the information a little bit late, so here it is. This is a building that is being leased by the Extension Service for the provision of home weatherization training for contractors, and there has been a lease in existence for a number of years. It's paid for with grant funds, federal grant funds that flow through the Department of Public Health and Human Services. This is simply asking for a new lease, 5 years with possible 3 extensions, so possible 8 years total. It does have, I think, the important language in the lease agreement that if the federal funds are not available, then the lease will terminate. So that protection is included in the lease agreement. The first year lease price, a little over $165,000. It does have an escalator included in the lease, but again, it's federal dollars, and if those federal dollars do not materialize, the lease can be terminated at that point.
Thank you. Are there questions or comments from members of the board? Is there any public comment? Then if it's the will of the committee, this too will move forward. And then finally, for item E, the operating budgets, I will turn again to Mr. Robinson to begin the conversation in this.
Madam Chair, members of the committee, geez, we're here already. We must be moving way too fast. Operating budgets are brought to the board for approval in September of each year. Obviously, we've been talking about budgets and flowing through the state legislature, et cetera, it seems like we always are approaching that from one end or the other. And so we bring forward to you for your official approval the all funds budget for the Montana University system. And if we can pull up that all funds summary, I would just like to make a few comments regarding the information. Generally in our budget discussions, we will be focused on the current operating unrestricted budget, because that is the budget that really holds the state funding and it holds the tuition dollars. And so most of our budget discussions revolve around the current unrestricted budget. However, as you can see, the current unrestricted budget for fiscal year 12 totals about $456 million. The total all funds budget for the university system in the bottom line, $1.37 billion. And so we have those other fund structures that we deal with on the campuses. The current restricted fund will account for some federal financial aid. Probably the largest portion of that particular fund would be federal grants that are restricted for particular purposes. A lot of the research dollars really flow through the current restricted budget. The designated fund, most of our fee revenue would be accounted for in designated fund, building fees, computer fees, some of those actions that are on the consent agenda, those fees are accounted for in terms of revenue in the designated funds, and the expenditures are part of the designated funds. Auxiliary enterprises, we've certainly just talked about a major addition to an auxiliary operation in Bozeman, so we have room and board fees, perhaps bookstore activity connected with auxiliary funds. And then the plant funds obviously deals with major operation maintenance expenditures on all of our campuses. Community colleges, you see the same structure in terms of the fund types. Generally accepted accounting for colleges and universities dictate the use of those major fund categories. Just looking at some of the percentage increases, I think we have all been aware that we did not get an increase in state dollars into this biennium. The increased current operating unrestricted fund, you can see the increase of 3% from fiscal year 11 to fiscal year 12 in terms of the budget. Most of that increase, or all that increase, would really be related to increases in tuition revenue that were approved in May. The current restricted fund does have a percentage increase of about 9%. Again, that would be federal dollars for the most part in terms of federal grants. So there's some anticipation on the part of campuses that they're asking for a little increase in authority in case those federal dollars do flow in terms of student financial aid as well as federal research projects. The plant funds have a significant increase in authority from 12 to 11, and there's probably of that 37 million. One of those projects, I think we have the Cooley Lab project on the MSU Bozeman campus that is, again, federal dollars to be used to renovate that particular building. And I think the cost of that renovation, I think it's somewhere in the range of 20 million, just short of $20 million. And there's, I think there's a authority in there for the Curry Health Center project that will be seen as an information piece earlier or later today about at the Missoula campus. So the large increase is really focused on some activity, building activity that we will see, not funded by state dollars, but perhaps funded by contributions, perhaps funded by operating efficiencies that they've had on the campuses. Some of the money that was put into reserves, I think specifically by MSU Bozeman, will be coming forward to do some renovations on classrooms on the Bozeman campus and is included in that plant fund plan fund category. So, a significant percentage increase in the plant funds across the system, but again, that is really utilizing perhaps capital contributions that might come in to help with the construction of projects, or federal dollars that are flowing, federal grant dollars for building renovation. As you move down toward the center of the information, there were a couple of very important funding elements. One-time only research funding, they are restricted for research activities, so we included those as a separate category, and there'll be a similar amount next year for the university system, but a $1.3 million that will be connected with EBSCOR and NASA grants, and then there's a $450,000 amount that would be connected with matching with some private research funds. As you look at the Office of the Commissioner, although that shows $7.7 million increase in terms of the bottom line, you can see that the majority of that is driven by that proprietary line, and that's really our health insurance plan, the growth in our health insurance plan. That's a proprietary fund. Otherwise, within the Office of the Commissioner, we would have a decrease in overall funding. Now, you do have to keep in mind that Digital Academy is included in fiscal year 11. That was funded in the Office of the Superintendent of Public Instruction at a higher level, I think about $2.2 million for each year. So it's not in the university system, but it was funded in OPI. The $946,000 for the distance learning two-year colleges, that was one-time only funding that was used to help expand the banner system to both Miles City and Dawson, one-time only funding. So that, Madam Chair, is the all funds budget, and that is the dollar amount that would be the official approval amount for the Board of Regents. If I could just take a quick look at the state fund summary that is showing, you can I guess take a look at the net changes that take place. And again, we do have some important increases in funding coming from the state. The bottom line, we do have those research dollars, again, $1.75 million for the year. And we just did have to make an adjustment. We had left a little something out here. So we left that research OTO out from an earlier piece that we had posted. So want to make sure that we got that in place. And again, the Digital Academy shows as a decrease, but again, it's not funded in the university system, but it's funded in the Office of the Superintendent of Public Instruction. The student assistance dollar amount in total will remain the same or very nearly the same in terms of expenditure, but there was a funding switch during the legislative session which replaced about that amount of general fund with federal special revenue funds from the guaranteed student loan operation. So with that, Mr. Chairman, I would certainly be willing to answer any questions. I did not plan on moving into specific review of the MUS operating budget information as presented, but if you've had a chance to connect with those, you can see that similar reports in terms of the fund types, et cetera, are available for each of the campuses. There are metrics connected with each of the campuses and agencies, and so you can certainly utilize that information for your purposes in terms of addressing questions, et cetera. Thank you.
Thank you. Are there questions or comments from members of the board? Any comments from our campuses? Okay, public comment. Thank you. Then, if it is the will of the committee, this will move forward as an action item tomorrow. I would just like to extend a great big thank you to Mr. Robinson and to each of the campuses who spent time on the phone with me as I went through the metrics and went through the documents over the last month. So a great big thank you to you all. All right, then, on to our information items. Our first one is an update on the biofuels research project at MSU Northern, and so we'll turn to Chancellor Callahan for a brief update on this project.
Thank you, Madam Chairman, members of the board, members of the committee. This information update provides you with an overview of where we are now. We were challenged with bids coming in high on this particular modification. We did receive approval from the Department of Energy regarding increase in allocations for the modification. Unfortunately, the recent round of bidding came in higher than we had expected. So we're at the process now where I understand State A&E is meeting today at 3 o'clock to discuss what we do next. And the recommendation is that we pare back the modifications to fit within the budget. We have no additional funding to utilize and rebid. So that's where we're at. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Chancellor Callahan. Okay. The next information item is the discussion regarding the Curry Health Center at the University of Montana, and so for that I'll turn to President Engstrom.
Thank you, Madam Chair, members of the board. First, let me say thanks to Deputy Commissioner Robinson for his wise counsel on bringing this forward to you as an information item and helping us put that together. This is a project that we want to undertake to renovate our Curry Health Center, not to increase the square footage of it, but just to renovate the space that we have. Due to increased student enrollment and increased student demands within the health center, that is one reason for doing this. There are privacy issues associated with students coming in for health care that some of our entryways don't really address in an adequate way. And primarily, this is an effort to just improve our delivery of health care to our students. We take great pride in that on our campus, and we want to continue that level of care. So this is a project that will be a $4 million renovation project. There is a budget associated with this in the information item. $1 million of that is in hand within the Curry Health Center budget now, and we intend to finance $3 million of it and pay the debt service on that, which is approximately $250,000 per year. The Curry Health Center has satisfied some debt service that was at the level of $125,000. So that money will now be applied to this new debt service, and in addition, they'll direct $125,000 out of their regular capital fund budget to pay this debt service as well. So if there are any questions on the design or the reasons for doing this or the financing, we have people here can address that. Rick Curtis is the director of our Curry Health Center, and he's here with us today. Thank you.
Thank you, President Engstrom. Are there questions from members of the board for? Yes, Regent Barrett.
Yes, Madam Chair, President Engstrom. Has there been any student feedback on this, or is it maybe just not in their purview?
Regent Barrett, members of the board, let me turn to Rick to address that, if he could, please.
Good morning, Regent Barrett. We've actually worked with the Associated Students of the University of Montana executive officers in this process. It was under that advice and that counsel that they decided that it really didn't need to go through the ASUM Senate process, because we're looking at something that's not generating additional charges or fees or fee requests. So we worked through the executive officers, but not the Senate in general. Thank you.
Further questions or comments from members of the board? Okay. Thank you, Mr. Yes, Deputy Commissioner.
Madam Chair, members of the committee, I have been looking at a lot of information on this. Rosie Keller has been very good at answering my questions, addressing my questions with information. Still have some analysis to do on it, but I think certainly the need that is presented here in terms of enhanced services to students seems to be very present. And the issue is simply my review, spending time on looking at the finances, trying to make sure that all of the puzzle pieces can fit together well in terms of the future repayment of debt connected with this. So we would anticipate, I would think, that this would be coming forward to the board as an action item at a meeting coming up very soon. Thank you.
Thank you. Regent Christian.
Do you have any idea, President Engstrom, what is the usage? I mean, percentage of students that use it, and students that are on university health plan, do they have to use Curry, or are there other options available to them?
Regent Christian, again, let me call on Rick to provide that detail, if I could, please.
Regent Christian, thank you for the question. Curry Health Center experiences about 37,000 student visits per year. We're actually the third largest clinic in western Montana in relation to that. There's two different parts of your question. One is about the insurance. Students do not have to be part of the student insurance program to use Curry Health Center. They can have any insurance. We can see students on that. We actually have three primary clinics. We have a medical clinic, which is a 24-hour, 7-day-a-week service. We also have a dental clinic and a counseling and psychological services clinic. Did I miss another part of the question?
Just curious if they are on our health plan, then do they have to go through Curry, or are there other options? Can they go to any clinic in Missoula?
They can actually go to any clinic in Missoula. However, a lot of students do choose to use Curry Health Center because we're about 30% in our charges compared to the Missoula area.
Yeah. Okay.
Thank you. Further questions or comments from members of the board? Thank you. President Engstrom, would you like to move on to the next agenda item then?
Thank you, Madam Chair, members of the board. This information item deals with an organization called Montech. So I'll give you a brief history of this. 10 years ago, you approved the formation of Montech as a 501c3. It was a partnership between the University of Montana and the Missoula Area Economic Development Council. So for the past 10 years, Montech has been run as an entrepreneurship center under the direction of a board made up of representatives from both MAEDC and the University of Montana. During that 10-year period, a number of startup companies and other entities have been in and out of that building, and some of them have made use of the entrepreneurship and incubator functions that Montech provides. So it has been a successful venture to date. Recently, however, we have had a change that has really made us rethink Montech. MAEDC, some of you may know this, has decided to essentially go out of business, and they are in the process of closing shop, if you will. I don't know what the final date of that dissolution will be, but it is in process. The city of Missoula has taken a different direction, really, in terms of economic development, and MAEDC does not see itself as a part of that future. So our partner in the Montech venture has told us that they are going out of business, essentially. So that puts us in an interesting position. We very much want Montech to continue and succeed. We have an extremely exciting company in there right now, Rivertop Renewables, that is on a really nice trajectory and has hired a number of our own students, our own graduates, and so it is on the verge of being a really nice success story for the university, for the state of Montana. But we do need to rethink the way that we oversee Montech. And so this is an information item because this is all a proposal at this point, subject to really approval by the MAEDC as they close shop, and us as the university and you as the Board of Regents. But we will be proposing that we enter into a situation where we manage Montech as the University of Montana instead of Montech contracting that out to MAEDC. And so we will do that. We've already started doing that, essentially on an in-kind basis to Montech. Secondly, there are outstanding management fees that in recent months Montech has not paid to MAEDC for the management of this organization. And so we are proposing as the university to cover half of those management fees as MAEDC closes shop, and they will have to absorb the rest of it. And then as we look forward to the next several years of operation of Montech, the next 2 years do show in our pro forma a cash shortage. And so we intend, as the University of Montana, to cover that cash shortage to the tune of about $100,000 in year 3. Then the pro forma shows Montech coming out of that and it being in a cash positive situation, and in that situation we'll repay the university that that short-term loan, essentially, if you will, that we would cover for Montech. So we're not asking for approval from you at this point, again, because this is all pending, and I'm not exactly sure what approval we need to ask you for technically. But we do want to make sure that you're up to speed on what is going on, and that you have confidence that we are handling the situation effectively. If you have further questions on this, there are a number of people in the room who can address those as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. President. Are there questions or comments from members of the board? Okay, then with that, we will turn to Deputy Commissioner Robinson.
Madam Chair, members of the committee, I wonder if I could ask President Royce a question on November of last year, I think, was the approval of the use of the $1.75 million for renovation that would match a federal grant. And I guess my question is, have we received that federal grant, and has that construction moved forward at all?
Yeah, thank you, Deputy Commissioner Robinson, members of the board. Thanks for bringing that to my memory. So last year you did approve an action item that we brought forward. Rivertop Renewables has applied for an economic development grant, and that required us to partner with them. And that grant did come through, and you approved us partnering with them to the tune of $1.75 million. And so that is still scheduled to go forward, and Rivertop and Montech are still very much on track with that. We did make the decision during this transition period to hold off spending any of that money until this settles out. And so as of today, we have not spent any of our money on that, and we have not spent the EDC money on that. But as soon as all of this transition is finalized, we anticipate going forward full speed ahead with that.
Okay.
Did I miss any details on that, Vice President Duringer?
Deputy Commissioner Robinson, members of the board, we have spent some of our money on it because we had to be able to move this along through we paid the architects and some of the things that needed to be done. We have not spent any of the EDA money yet because it's a lot easier for us to recover if something goes down that we don't like with just our money as opposed to having spent federal money on it. And then you're in just a whole bee's nest of regulations and rules, and we didn't want to get into that.
Thank you. And I'll turn it back to you, Mr. Chair.
Chairman McLean, I just say, just a comment, obviously I'm in Missoula, heard a fair amount about MEADC closing down, and I think President Engstrom got that exactly right. There's just sort of a community-wide direction change, and it's left them with some sort of uncertain times. I also sit next to the person that used to chair the MEADC at some certain sporting events, and I discussed it some with him. I really feel like the university's stepping into the right role here and doing the right thing and what's appropriate, and at the same time being very observant and cautious that we're spending university funds in some instances. But I think given the situation that was really not anything to do with the university or control of theirs, they're handling it extremely well, and it'll ultimately end up in the best possible spot as far as Montech and the ability to have the incubator move forward and some of the things that are on the horizon, which are good things. Same good things that they brought to us a year ago with regard to Rivertop and that. I think those will still be allowed to move forward and doesn't expose us to anything that we're not already exposed to, and it doesn't drag us into something new. It's what we're already a part of. It just is, I think, an appropriate resolve to see the disappearance of who was our partner, MEADC, in this. So I'm very supportive of this moving forward, and I think the university's handled it extremely well, and I think it sort of had an opportunity at one point to blow up into something much more, and even sort of a public spectacle at one point. There was lots of emotions running, and President Engstrom and his team have done a good job to take a real level approach at this, meet the appropriate people, and see that it's moving forward. So if and when it comes back to us, it's certainly, I think, been handled right, and I think the community appreciates the role of the university and our ability to see the completion of this project.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Now I'll turn it back to you to take the break.
All right. I think we'll take a 10 or 15 minute break and be back for the discussion items in the committee.
So am I on? Is that what you're telling me, Regent McLean? Members of the board, what I plan to do this morning with this particular topic is to walk through the metrics that we have attached here, the 4 metrics that we normally look at every year, and then my hope was that we could then get into a budget conversation with Presidents Cruzado and Engstrom and Hickswaw regarding trying to make that connection between the operating budgets, which are just a bunch of numbers, and the concepts and goals that the campuses are working toward and forward, and in the connection with the Board of Regents strategic plan and Board of Regents goals. So, I'm hoping we can have that type of conversation, and the presidents are prepared to do a lead-in presentation, and hopefully we can work off of that, and you as members of the board can perhaps ask questions or get a little more information regarding, we have a lot of these good dashboard figures, and we've got metrics, and how do we connect the operating budget to the goals of the university system and the Board of Regents. So we'll see how this goes this morning. The first metric that is presented is really just the enrollment information, and spend just a couple of minutes on this, but you'll notice just pointing out the growth that we have seen in enrollment over this period, fiscal year 8 to fiscal year 12, and it's a 3.7% growth rate. Now, that's even with, if you look at the budgeted numbers in terms of enrollment for fiscal year 12, the budgeted numbers that show up there are only about a 0.5% increase for fiscal year 12. So, and at this point, my understanding is that the numbers that are present in terms of enrollment would result in about a 2.9% increase in enrollment for this year across the system, assuming all of those students would pay. Now, we're going to lose some of those numbers. We're not to the official count date, et cetera. But there's going to be growth. There's going to be growth on our campuses in excess of what was projected in terms of number of FTEs. So 3.7% increase in enrollment growth rate over that particular period, fiscals 8 through 12. And you can notice a relationship in terms of there's not a lot of difference in terms of residents haven't grown as fast as non-residents, and Western undergraduate exchange. The College of Technology and two-year campuses, the community colleges, certainly have had the highest growth rate in terms of percentages, and you can see those reflected as well as the Gallatin College. And the second metric, expenditures per student. Sure.
Is that a change? Because I thought last year we were saying that especially with the current economic conditions, that non-resident growth had slowed quite a bit. The resident growth was happening at a higher rate.
I'm not sure. Is Tyler around, or did he go back to Helen already? Oh, there he is.
Go back.
I'm going to ask Tyler to, he looks at these enrollment numbers every day. If you look at, can you have an answer to that?
I'm just curious, because one of the things we thought we were sort of bumping up against price point and some other factors that were with our pricing of out-of-state tuition, and that we were starting to see a slow. In fact, I thought it was level at the University of Montana in particular last year, and that resident tuition, or resident enrollment was where the only source of growth. But that certainly looks the opposite for this summary.
Tyler? You know, if we can scroll down to the next slide does have the detail by campus. Under enrollment, the second page. And you can look specifically at the University of Montana did have, you know, a slight decline in fiscal year 11. It actually went from 2,485 to 2,600 in terms of non-resident enrollment. There was a pretty significant growth in non-residents in Bozeman. Tyler and Sheila are trying to work on technology together over there.
They were just pointing out on the earlier slide, that percentage of growth is over the period of time that the slide is on. It does show a decline even. It's not the one-year growth rate.
That's a 4-year growth rate on that. Yes.
There is a showing a non-resident decline in 9 states between 11 and budget 12. So it's, I guess,
Okay. Any other questions on the enrollment information? The expenditures per student, the next metric, and this is one where you know, I think there needs to be, you know, I think significant praise to our campuses regarding this. Now, and again, it's the growth rate that I'm looking at in terms of, we're taking this period 08 through 12 in terms of the fiscal years, and you know, look at the growth rate that we have there. Obviously, the first year from 8 to 9, there was some growth, you know, in terms of funding per student or expenditures per student, and so the revenue would be equal to the expenditures. So expenditures per student did increase in fiscal year 9, and that, if you remember, that's sort of the last year of the college affordability program, where there was some pretty significant increase in state funding. Still, for that year, holding tuition at 0. And then as we get into fiscal years 10 and 11, the state budget, the state revenue picture declines, and we did have some reductions in expenditures at the campuses for both of those years. And fiscal year 12, really we don't have increase in state funding. We were able to maintain fairly well all of the funding that we had, including federal stimulus dollars that were really on a one-time only basis. So a little bit below funding for fiscal year 11, but fairly close. We do have tuition increases in fiscal year 12, but the growth rate in terms of expenditures per student over that particular period, almost flat. And I think we have campuses doing a good job of managing. Certainly, this is a combination of number of students divided into the expenditures. So expenditures have gone up, but sort of in relation to the number of students. So the expenditures per student really stayed fairly stable across all of our campuses. Some increases in places. You can see Helena and Flathead had actually gone down in terms of percentage, and I think that's driven by, again, the significant enrollment increases at those two campuses, and one of the reasons why that growth rate is pushed into the negative. So I think campuses are doing good work in terms of providing the services to the students with not increase in the expenditures per student. So it's being spread over a larger number of students in terms of those services. Now, one of the things trying to make a comparison back to the completion productivity information that Tyler had. Tyler's information actually started earlier. It went to an earlier period, a couple of years earlier than what we have here. It started with, I think, the 05-06 year. But for the comparison in terms of the last couple of columns that Tyler had on his information, the expenditures per student pretty much stayed the same, constant, didn't change very much during that particular period. So kind of helps, I guess, interpret the completion productivity information in terms of expenditures per student and how that relates to cost per completion, those types of issues. So again, I think it's important to take these into play in combination and not just looking at one metric. Any questions regarding expenditures? If we go to the next slide, this is the expenditures by program, and when we talk about program in college university accounting, we have the instruction, academic support, student services, and in your strategic plan, there is a goal that points towards 70%, that those three categories we'd like to see at 70% of the total expenditures. The institutional support is probably the main overhead category that we have, and I sort of look at that and think, gee, if we can keep that 10% or below, we're doing well. And then we always want to make sure that we have, adequate investment in plant operation and maintenance to address at least some of the minor deferred maintenance that we have on our particular campuses. There are a couple of points that I would just like to mention here. The MSU Bozeman, it does show 66.2%. Part of that is an anomaly that shows up here. And the same is probably true for MSU Billings in terms of some of the dollar amounts that were put into reserve accounts are being used for construction, classroom renovation on both the MSU Bozeman campus and MSU Billings campus. So you can see that the operation and maintenance percentage is a little bit higher, and the subtotal, that 70% subtotal, is a little bit lower. But they are investments, again, in students, in the student classroom. It may not be specific instruction, but it's kind of instruction related in terms of the infrastructure. So probably a proper decision in terms of how that is expended, but it's included in plant and equipment. So again, to sometimes interpret the percentages, you have to dig a little deeper into the details. And also, Missoula, 68.5. In terms of how they have budgeted some of the dollars that they would flow into some student success items, I believe that they have used the term parked some of those dollars in the institutional support, but they will probably end up being spent in terms of the instruction category or academic support or student services. Yes, question?
I don't have a question, and I do think that line you were just focusing on, Mick, is a good one and is an important one. But one of the things we hear a lot about is the expenditures on O&M, and I would like either now or in a couple minutes to talk about that line, if I could, just a little. Is this a good time? Am I interrupting you?
No, go ahead.
Okay. I remember as chancellor at Western that we had stayed steady for quite a few years at in the 13 to 14% range for O&M for Western. Clearly, the fact that the percentage has gone down a little bit may have to do with energy efficiency investments, but probably the main factor is a few more students at Western to help, spread more of the cost of up on the instruction side given the infrastructure you have to support. And I would like to note, and I wonder if it deserves a compliment for MSU Northern. For example, this is more of a question, I guess, to anyone, Mick, you or Joe or whatever, but the fact that we know that MSU Northern has a really big physical plant, and a lot of it's aging. The fact that they're able to keep their O&M to about 12% strikes me as commendable, but I don't know. I don't know that for sure. It strikes me as a compliment. One of the things I often hear from legislators and others is, well, and faculty bargaining and other places, are we spending too much on O&M? Are we doing enough investing when we build new buildings to replace or take off stream old inefficient buildings? So it's just one line to watch over history, and I guess I would welcome just a little bit of comment, members of the board, from our CEOs on the campuses if they have observations to add to that to make me smarter, to make us smarter. Thank you.
Madam Chair and Commissioner, I just pulled up the metric, this program metric for Northern, MSU Northern, and looking at we show a 5-year history from 08 to 12 for the operation and maintenance, and it's been fairly consistent in terms of percent. In 08 it was 11.7, and it bumped up to 13 for a couple of years, 12, and stayed at 12.2, 12.1. So there has been a consistent investment, and I think you'll see that on the part of all campuses. I know the MSU Northern campus, they do have challenges in terms of the maintenance, the deferred maintenance issues they have with that large, or that campus with a lot of buildings. So I do think that they are trying to maintain a reasonable level of investment in terms of that operation maintenance. Chancellor Callahan is.
Just one last comment on that. I have often heard, because of the new buildings on the MSU and campuses in particular, have had the opportunity to make some investments recently. Over time, MIC has their percentages seem right in line with everyone else's. And is it fair? Here's my question: is it fair to assume that a lot of that investment was in enough energy efficiency and taking care of deferred maintenance, that even with new square footage, that it kept O&M at a pretty steady pace, if in fact it didn't even cause that those O&M costs to decline? I'm not positive that's a fair statement, but it may be for some campuses.
Commissioner, I think if you have buildings on a campus, you're going to have significant ongoing maintenance issues. Certainly, if you build a new campus or a new building, in the early years of that particular building, you're not going to have perhaps major deferred maintenance, but you do have a maintenance exposure. You're adding some additional square footage that you do have to maintain. Now, that may have reduced, taken out of play a significant level of major deferred maintenance in terms of that new building or renovation. I think the Gaines Hall example in Bozeman is probably the prime example in recent years where there was multi-million-dollar price tag on deferred maintenance in that particular building, and the building was completely renovated. So it took that deferred maintenance off. They are going to have maintenance on that building from day one, now that it's renovated, but it's not going to be as significant. They can take then what they have as their normal budget in deferred maintenance, and they can apply that to other very needed deferred maintenance projects on campus. So I think that you'll find that all campuses have probably more need for deferred maintenance than they have money, and they utilize those dollars that come from the normal budgeting process as best that they can to address major projects. And I think they're very, very good stewards of those dollars and how they apply those dollars throughout the campus. One of the issues that we faced the last two bienniums is that the dollars flowing through the state of Montana capital project, long-range building program that really to try to help us, again, address deferred maintenance has been fairly minimal. So we haven't had significant flows through the state long-range building program. We would hope that that would improve as we go into the next legislative session. But that's another direction that we'd look at. Now, one thing to always keep in mind, community colleges do not have access to the state long-range building program. So you'll see that as you look at the metric for community colleges, they might have a little bit higher percent, certainly Flathead does in terms of operation maintenance. They do not rely or have not been able to utilize state long-range building program dollars for their campuses, so they have to rely more on sort of the internal funding, local funding, perhaps bonds at the local level to be able to address some of their major deferred maintenance issues. There was some funding that in the last biennium that did come from federal ARA funds for community colleges that did plug some money into deferred maintenance for those campuses.
One thing that I would like to add about the efficiency in the 66.2%, as Deputy Commissioner Robinson explained, I also think that there was something that happened with the change in, or with the transition in leadership, and the fact that by the time I arrived, it was January already. So the decision was made to request the Board of Regents to move $3 million to reserve until we had an opportunity to complete a comprehensive review about possible uses for those dollars. Therefore, there are $3 million there that are not being included in 10, but then when you take a look at 11, we transferred $4 million in order from the reserves that the Regents authorized, to start investing them, particularly, as Mick said, in classroom renovations, ADA compliance. Our students are very serious about sustainability issues, so we are incorporating some very efficient mechanisms now. So it's an investment today that will pay off in the future. And finally, this is in the same line as with the housing project. We need to look at every space as an opportunity for learning and enhancing learning experiences for those students. So it's almost tragic that the number in O&M went up, when in reality, all those projects are being devoted 100% to instruction. Oh, by the way, I did the calculation, and if we had not included that or calculated that in that manner, actually our efficiency rate would have been 67.9%. So closer to what we had been accomplishing. Right, correct. Thank you.
Members of the board, I do think with the review of this metric, I think I think the campuses do have that 70% goal in mind and do try to work to keep the investments focused on the students, instruction, academic support, student services. Yes. Regent Christian.
I know we've talked about this in the past, and I just can't recall what the guidelines were, but do we have a set target for waivers? And what is that? I think it's a percentage, isn't it?
Regent Christian, we do not have a set percentage or a set target for waivers in terms of dollars. We do there in the policy there are a couple of different percentages. There is a 2% limit in terms of the number of non-resident waivers that can be granted. There's a 4% factor percentage in terms of graduate student waivers and a 6%, I think, in terms of resident student waivers. Now, the only one that we've bumped up against and are having some discussions around is the 2% non-resident waiver. And part of that, as you remember, maybe I guess might have been November of last year, we did bring to the board the issue regarding tuition rates for teaching assistants and research assistants, where in order to compete on a national basis, the campuses were having to use waivers, where other states were really just setting the tuition for those individuals. Right. So we did make that change, and that has had a downward impact in terms of waivers. We still have an ongoing issue, I think, on the 2% waiver issue with the MSU Bozeman campus that we need to continue to work on.
I guess I was aware of that, but relatively we're within the guidelines set out in those categories.
We are close. I mean, there's been no problem with the 4% or 6%. We still have MSU Bozeman that is above the 2% in terms of non-resident waivers, that we need to continue to have discussions around that issue. No more questions on that. Let's move to the metric for per student funding. Again, I think the important relationship to try to point out in terms of, we have expenditures per FTE, and the expenditure per FTE is a little bit different than what shows up on the previous slide, because at the bottom of this, there's an indication that there are a couple of revenue sources, program fees and student super tuition or program tuition, that would not be included in this calculation of expenditures per FTE. But I think the important relationship to look at in terms of resident students, if you look at the expenditures per student, and then the next line is the state support per FTE, and then the average resident tuition per FTE. And you can kind of see the relationships in terms of the various campuses. But for all of the four-year campuses, you'll notice that the campuses do rely on what we refer to as a non-resident subsidy, which indicates that as we bring non-residents into our campuses, the non-residents are paying tuition in excess of the expenditure per student. And so that additional revenue over cost that is there is basically spread across the campus, and it really helps to educate and fund the education of resident students in the state. So important relationship to look at, and you can see that the subsidy is very, very important to our flagship universities, MSU and U of M. Very important, and that's where we do have the bulk of the non-resident students. But it's also an important issue for for all of those campuses in terms of that subsidy. As you look at it from a standpoint of the two-year campuses, further down on the slide, the non-residents, it's not as big an issue. One thing to keep in mind for the community colleges, when we talk about other revenue per FTE, probably the largest chunk of that is the local taxpayer support through the local mill levy for those particular campuses. So when we talk about community colleges, we have certainly the state funding, state support, you have the tuition, and then you have the local support for those campuses. And you do notice for Dawson and Miles City, it's a negative when you get down to the non-resident subsidy, and I think a lot of that, I think, and maybe Stephanie can talk about that a little bit later, but for the most part, I think it's connected with waivers, et cetera, presented to non-resident athletes that are involved in the teams on those particular campuses. That would be the bulk of the non-resident students that would be coming to those campuses. The other three two-year entities do not have the supports, so would not have that particular issue to deal with. So with that, Madam Chair, that would conclude my comments on those metrics.
Thank you, Deputy Commissioner. Now, before we turn to the campuses, are there questions or comments from the Commissioner or members of the Board? Okay, then to continue the discussion, I will turn to our two presidents. President Engstrom, would you like to begin?
Okay. Thank you, Madam Chair, members of the Board. I want to just make a couple of points, and I put at your stations a packet of materials just to help me illustrate the points that I want to make. So in talking with Deputy Commissioner Robinson, one of the ideas that we wanted to discuss today and emphasize is the relationship between planning and how we spend our money. And so we have been working really hard on our campus on what we are calling this planning assessment continuum, where we have set up the annual cycle in a 4-part process, beginning with planning, budgeting, implementation, and assessment. So each fall, we enter the year reviewing the strategic plan, making adjustments in that strategic plan, and handing that plan off to what is now the University Budgeting Committee. The University Budgeting Committee, their first job is to read the plan, read the updated plan, and then go through the budgeting process, weighing initiatives in accordance with that strategic plan, and making decisions then that get us further down the road in each of those strategic issues in the plan. That budget then, of course, is handed off to the people in charge of implementation, the vice presidents, the deans, the chairs, and they go about spending that money in accordance with the budget committee's directives. Each summer then, we are now conducting an annual assessment report, and so that you have a copy of that in front of you. And that annual assessment report really has two components to it. One is really what you might call qualitative information, graphs and trends and so on. But then in addition, we produce each year now a report card. And so you have the report card in your packet, both in large format and in pocket-sized format. We're trying to get everybody on campus to carry these around in their front pockets to continually remind ourselves of our plan and our metrics. I'm not being really successful at that yet. But anyhow, if you look at the report card, you will see that there are 5 headings there. Those 5 headings, partnering for student success, education for the global century, and so on, are identical to the 5 strategic issues in the plan. So for each of those strategic issues, we've identified a set of metrics that we are tracking and that we have set goals for out in the year 2020. This is a subset of metrics. There are quite a few more, but for the purposes of a report card, we are using this condensed set. So the message here is that we have a plan. We've worked really hard over the last year getting that plan in place, and the people that are here with me in the room deserve all of the credit for getting that done. It was a very intensive effort on their part, and to bring that plan together in a relatively short period of time was a great accomplishment. I'm very proud of them. Likewise, identifying all of these metrics and goals for those metrics involved a great deal of work on their part as well. Now, these metrics aren't perfect. You could argue, well, what about this metric or that metric, or what about this percentage or that percentage? That's why we review this every year. This is an annual cycle, so the results of this year's cycle, the assessment, feed the discussion about the strategic plan for next year and so on. So it's just a continual cycle that we repeat year after year, and that gives us the opportunity then to learn from our assessment and say, okay, we're not doing as well at student retention at the COT, for example, as we want to. What do we need to change to do a better job, and make those adjustments in the plan, and then reevaluate next year. So we recognize that this has to be an ongoing dynamic process, but the point here is that our planning and our budgeting are intimately tied together, and I think that's a very healthy direction for us. The second point then I'd like to make is just a qualitative discussion about the results of that cycle this year. What did we spend money on differently than we did last year? And so when you take just the net revenue picture that we have for the University of Montana Missoula campus compared to last year, with all of the adjustments made due to legislative, the legislative picture, the rebasing, the tuition, and so on, the total budget for the university is higher than it was last year. So what did we spend that money on? Going through this budget cycle process, one, we'll dedicate a big chunk of that to pay plan, yet to be finalized in negotiations, but a big piece of that will go to pay plan, as was a big part of the rationale for the student tuition increase. A second piece, in our case, will go to restoring our contingency. You may recall that due to enrollment growth over the last few years, the Missoula campus contingency had reached bottom. I mean, we basically didn't have a contingency as of a year or so ago. So we've been replenishing that so that we are trying to be a prudent business in having some reasonable percentage of our money set aside as a contingency. We are spending quite a bit of that money in base reallocations to accommodate enrollment growth. So we have moved in a base sense a good chunk of money to the College of Technology to cover basic instructional costs in the College of Technology and primarily in the College of Arts and Sciences on our campus. So just that basic classroom instruction. And then a series of specific initiatives that really resulted from that budget process, initiatives that the vice presidents brought forward and justified in terms of the strategic plan. And so then that budget committee made a set of recommendations on a number of initiatives that ultimately we approved and implemented. So I guess the message that I want to have, or I want to make, is simply that we're very planning driven, very assessment driven, and the specific decisions that we made this year really resulted from the direction given to us by that strategic plan. Thank you. Questions?
Thank you, President Engstrom. Are there questions or comments from members of the board? Chair Christian.
Question on one of the goals is to see study abroad go to 75% of the students, which certainly think is an excellent goal. I also hear lots of students that have been able to participate in that, you know, what a wonderful experience it's been, but it's also, they struggle with credits that count toward a degree. And I think this board often suggests we'd like to see the time to degree shortened, not lengthened, and I'm just curious how you guys feel that will impact it, and you know, how those two objectives can intersect?
Madam Chair, Regent Christian, a great question. We do want to see study abroad and other forms of what are called high-impact educational practices increase. Internships with companies, internships with agencies, undergraduate research, civic engagement, all of those, that whole portfolio we want to see increase because we feel in today's world that is the kind of education that our students need and deserve. And I think our Regent Teal would probably agree with that, given that he just returned from Kenya. But that does bring with it some challenges. You mentioned one of them. Does that slow down time to degree? In some cases, it does. And maybe that's a healthy thing in some ways because the educational experience they get with those practices is quite different than what they get in the classroom. I think we do need to work hard at that, and so one of the things that we are putting in place is something called an Office of Academic Enrichment that will give us the background support we need to make sure that we are doing a good job at advising students on their study abroad activities, getting them in the courses appropriate for them, and make sure that it's integrated into their other curriculum. I won't say it works perfectly, but we're quite aware of that issue, and I think we're moving in the right track to be more systematic about advising our students in that regard. The second very important point about those high-impact practices like study abroad is they can be very expensive, and not every student is going to be able to afford a study abroad experience. Some of you have heard me talk about our new Global Leadership Initiative, and we're out raising money privately, and one of the purposes of that money will be for scholarships specifically for these high-impact practices, so that if a student wants to study abroad and doesn't have the wherewithal to do that himself or herself, there's at least an opportunity to apply for some funds to help. We already do quite a bit of that in helping students go abroad, but this will be a renewed effort in that regard.
With the broad opportunities, can we enhance that to where more credits count?
Regent Christian, a great observation again, and I think we can enhance that. And we've got some nice examples of that. 2 or 3 years ago, you approved a new program in international geosciences as an example, and it's a partnership between the University of Montana, the University in Cork, Ireland, and Potsdam, Germany. And so our students and their students move between those 3 institutions over the course of their undergraduate program, and it's a very well-articulated plan. And so those students do that. They graduate. I mean, they can graduate in 4 years. They maybe don't all do that, but it's set up as a 4-year program and really well-articulated. So more of that is, I think, the way we need to go. We have, as do all of our schools in Montana, articulation agreements or MOUs with quite a number of schools internationally for student exchange. In general, those don't speak to close articulation in a curriculum sense, but I think we do need to move in that direction. Thank you.
A question, President Engstrom. You have given us a good description of how you connect budgeting to planning to assessment at the UM-Missoula campus. I know you meet on a regular basis with the chief executive officers of the other University of Montana campuses. Can you comment on how you work together and how they meet those same challenges, and maybe you invite them to give an example, but I would like to hear just a bit more, if we may, about the budgeting challenges and the collaboration, what you learn. I don't know, just some comments, some context, if you will, for the University of Montana campuses. Thank you.
Sure. Commissioner Stearns, members of the board. So the UM affiliation leadership meets fairly often. We have every Regents meeting. We have the night before a UM affiliate dinner, so we had that last night, and there we develop a full agenda for that meeting and talk through any number of issues. And so we have that meeting. We have gone to once a semester having what we call UM Campus Days on one of the 4 campuses. The first one of those was last spring. Dean Bingham hosted us at the Helena COT, and the topic of discussion was student success. This fall, Chancellor Story will host us at UM Western, and the topic is going to be assessment, actually. And then next spring, Chancellor Blackketter will host us on a topic yet to be determined. And so we're trying to use those days to put a van load of people from each campus and come together for a 4-campus discussion on some topic of choice, and at the same time allow that host campus to showcase some things on their campus that they'd like us all to see. So each of the other campuses are in various stages of strategic planning and assessment, and maybe I would just see if any of them would want to make a comment in that regard, since they're all sitting right poised behind me.
Commissioner Stearns, members of the board, I would give you a quick example. We just talked about renovation of our building for our arts program. Part of our strategic plan says clearly that we will upgrade our facilities when we can to support the academic program. That helped drive our decision to pursue this. And as I said, Vice Chancellor Briggs has been working towards it for quite some time. So there's a prime example where we used our plan. What we need to do is we were seeking permission to go ahead with it, and then we will assess how it's worked out.
Commissioner Stearns and members of the board, we, as a new chancellor, pretty standard procedure, but we've engaged on, I have engaged on initiating a new strategic plan process, a revision, a review of our strategic plan, and one of the, financially, and the budgeting has probably, it's been done well, and we have appropriate reserves. It's kind of nice coming from my previous life to that situation. But one of the things that we are instigating as part of that strategic planning process is a little more open dialogue on the allocation of resources based upon that strategic plan. So we're in the really early stages of it. We have had several meetings, including what I'm calling Breakfast for Excellence, where we meet on various topics to develop our strategic plan. The units are being asked to develop implementation plans, which correlate to the strategic plan, and also the action plan includes who's responsible, time frame, metrics for performance on particular implementation plans that will be developed within the units. It will be an interesting process as we allocate and prioritize and use our resources based upon both performance and priorities for the institution. I think it's a healthy process, and at this time with budgets stable and sound financial management in the past, I think it's a great time for us to look at how we can create efficiencies and allocate resources to where we want to grow our program. So we're starting with that. We'll provide you reports as you ask or want or don't want, in some cases in the future on that process. Thank you.
No. Absolutely.
Madam Chair, members of the board, Commissioner Stearns, UM Helena always goes back to a zero-based budget process in which we have our budget committee made up of institutional representation. And as we put together the budget for the next year, we are always paying attention to our mission, our strategic plan, and the Board of Regents strategic plan, looking for efficiencies. And when you're on a very tight budget, you have to make sure every penny is stretched, it counts. And then the bottom line is that you're meeting the goals of the institution, which we strive to do, which is student success. On some of the specific efficiencies that we look at doing with Missoula, for a good example would be Banner. We utilize a lot of their DBAs, we utilize them as our professional connection to make sure that our system is working in tandem with theirs, and that we are able to move the students through and make sure they're taken care of through that system. Another really good example would be any type of construction we have on campus. We utilize Missoula and their technology and their personnel to make sure that we are documenting things correctly, that we're overseeing them correctly, and that we are getting the biggest bang for our buck. So we reach out to Missoula and to partner with them as well as the other campuses, and then we also partner with your office also to make sure that we're doing everything we can to provide for the efficiencies for our students. As the documentations show, our expenditure is lowest in the state. It has gone up almost $700 in this fiscal year, and that's because of some reallocation that has happened. However, that money goes right back into the students in that this year we have hired 10 new personnel, 5 in academics and 5 in staff, no in administration. And we utilize Missoula as in our human resources to make sure that we're using that money efficiently also.
Madam Chair, if I could just add to that. One other meeting we had was about a month after Chancellor Blackketter got on board. We convened on his campus for, in this case, a special day-long retreat to really just ask ourselves, how are we functioning as a UM affiliation, and are there areas that we can work more effectively on by working together? And so we really had a great discussion and identified a whole list of areas, really, that we want to continue to examine and continue to move forward in. And so things like IT represent a fruitful ground for further collaboration. Our libraries already do a great job of collaborating, we found out on that day. But are there areas for improvement there? Yes, probably so. We have shared English language instruction, for example. When the campus in Butte started getting a number of students from, I think, was it Saudi Arabia, Don? They wanted some English language instruction, and so instead of starting from scratch on that, we sent our ELI folks over from Missoula and set up a collaborative arrangement that I think has worked out very well. Our international folks, I believe, were just down on the Western campus just a few days ago talking about how can we work together to enhance international experiences for our students. So we've had pretty good dialogue, I think, as a UM affiliation. Thank you.
Thank you. Unless there are further questions or comments from members of the board, we'll move to President Cruzado. Thank you, President Engstrom.
Sure. Well, at Montana State University, we have, again, also the same conversations about the importance of the strategic plan. We are in an advanced stage. We are hoping to have our planning completed by the end of this semester. But many important things are happening, and I wanted to bring you up to speed, particularly Deputy Commissioner Robinson asked us to talk a little about 4 items, a little about financial aid, effectiveness and efficiency, retention and completion, and then a sense about a little bit more of the fall enrollment numbers. When I take a look at the fall enrollment numbers, I'm very pleased because what they tell us, it's a great story. Despite the declining numbers of seniors in Montana high schools, I think that we had 400 less this year. Still, when you take a look at the numbers at Montana State University, the 4 campuses are going up in terms of those students. So one thing I was observing in the case of Bozeman is our overall student headcount is very strong. Actually, last year we grew by 800 students. This year we will grow by an additional 500 students. That's our estimates at this number. As of last Friday, we were up from 13,559 from fall 2010. We went up to 14,218. We predict that once those students pay and the national attrition that occurs, we are predicting 14,060 students in the Bozeman campus. The story is very interesting because it's not only about quantity, it's also about the quality of those students. For example, those numbers do reflect additional Native American students. We have grown our Native American students numbers by 49 this fall. Those numbers reflect, that would be a 10% increase in our Native American students. The numbers also tell the story of more veterans enrollments. So we have an additional 3.3% increase in our veteran students. And another very interesting thing is an increase in transfers. So we have a total of 660 students who transferred to Bozeman, or a 3% growth. Those are resident students, and an 18% growth in non-resident students. So the other part is not only about numbers, as I said, but how are these students prepared? Well, for the last 2 years, the average ACT of the freshman class has been 25.1, which I think is very high. Well, this year, with even more students, the average ACT score rose to 25.2. So we continue to attract excellent students. This class of this year includes 65 students with an ACT or SAT scores in the 99 percentile. That means with an ACT score of 33. So these are our future leaders. And also, MSU attracted 96 of the 176 prestigious Montana High School Honor Scholarships that are administered by OCHI. We have also great numbers in our other campuses. Billings is projecting an increase of 1%. We have surpassed the 5,000 student mark by a lot. Great Falls, an impressive growth of 5.5% at 13,005 students. And with Northern, we are experiencing a slight decrease of 1%. So Chancellor Callahan is helping us identify additional opportunities to take a look at that. How do we keep those numbers? It's not only about attracting more new students, it's also about retaining the ones that we have. It's also about helping them move forward in degree completion. You saw the numbers that Tyler explained to us this morning. I'm extremely pleased by the fact that the 4 campuses in MSU have about 21 FTE, degree per FTE. Still, it's not enough. And because it's not enough, I have left in your desks a model of some of the initiatives that we have identified that will help us engage our students. If you open, can you have the, if you take a look at what the Office of Student Success is doing, there are a myriad programs that are targeting our students. We have an initiative aimed at our freshman class, that's FYI. Now we have, since our freshman student retention now has grown from 72% to 74%, still not enough. Now we are also adding a second-year initiative, 2YI. An initiative that we know is working, because the most important thing in retaining students is engagement. If that student feels engaged, if that student feels that the faculty and the staff and the entire climate is working in his or her favor, that student will stay with us. So Champ Change is one of those initiatives that it's aiming at connecting students so that they participate more, that they participate more in student associations, that they participate more in our cultural events, our artistic events, our sports events, so that they find a sense of community and identity. I also wanted to mention, we have others like Smarty Cats, and we tend to think that they are very smart already. Other programs that I thought would be interesting for the regions, because these are at the forefront of what the entire nation is doing, is Return to Learn. We know that there are impressive number of students out there who are missing 6 credits, 9 credits, 12 credits. So Return to Learn is aimed to that student that, for whatever reason, stop. So the institution makes a direct effort at identifying that student, contacting that individual, and say, why did you quit? What can we do in order for you to come back? Is it financial aid? What is it that you need? So that that student can come back and we can offer those courses that the person needs in order to complete. I have an impressive number to share with the board, and that it's graduation rates in Bozeman. And I felt so proud when I came last year, and you might remember from my presidential address, and I said that the graduation rate at Montana State University Bozeman was 42%, and I thought that was unacceptable. At the end of May 2010, that graduation rate went to 47%. This last graduation rate is 50.8%, which tells me that when we convey a clear message, everybody responds. This is not about watering down the quality of our courses, of our requirements. It's about what are we doing in order to those students to succeed. Going back to the one Montana State approach, one of the things that the 4 chancellors are working now, or that I'm working with the 4 chancellors and the campuses, is in a single MSU initiative aimed at advising. We know that each of our campuses already have in place very successful initiatives. Can we share that information? But then, once we have done that, now let's take it to the next level. Let's stretch. What are the new initiatives that we need to identify and put in place? And in order to signal that commitment to a one MSU approach to student success and advising, we are in the final stages of purchasing a software that's called DegreeWorks, which will be an additional tool that will be at the service of our students, so that that student doesn't find in the last semester when he or she thought that they were going to graduate, oh, now I'm missing 4 credits. It will only be a tool, because what we have been identifying is that doesn't replace a committed individual that will help that student advance in her or his curriculum. So that's in the area of enrollment and completion. In the area of efficiency, I think you saw the numbers. Every campus is trying very hard to redirect those dollars to the classroom and to serve our students. Special mention, and I would like to say again, MSU Great Falls, COT, is doing an extraordinary job in attracting students, retaining them, and placing those dollars in the classroom. Financial aid. We are looking at ways in which we can expand our opportunities, particularly for need-based opportunities. You heard yesterday during the inauguration of Chancellor Groseth, when he divulged with us the wonderful success story of the Opportunity Campaign, a 3-year, $6 million targeted campaign that will allow more resources to go for special students, students with financial need, homemakers, that single parent that needs that extra push, that part-time student. That's what we are trying to aim. Last fall, we were very lucky in Bozeman to receive $1 million for the establishment of a new presidential award funded by David Kemp, who's an alum, class of '67. And what is unique about that, this is not just for the traditional successful student, it's for that student that shows potential. Those of us who have been in the classroom, and there are many people here, I'm sure that you know what I'm talking about when I say you enter a classroom and there is one student there that has a special star on his or her forehead. Maybe the person hasn't been as successful yet. You take a look at the track record, it doesn't, but that person has a star on his or her forehead. How can we bring that out? Which is the real mission of education, is to bring out, right? It's not to push in. So those are some of the initiatives that I'm so proud of the campuses that they are identifying in order to make sure that money doesn't stand in the way of our students being successful and being all that they can be. Additional materials have circulated, and we are preparing a unified presentation about advising and retention initiatives at the 4 campuses of MSU for our meeting in November. So with that, I stand for questions.
Thank you, Madam President. Are there questions or comments from members of the board? Regent Buchanan.
Looking at some of the other initiatives that we've got going through, you guys both just shared some highlights as to the quality of students that we're attracting into the system and how that's been increasing steadily. And I know that as we further this discussion related to differentiation, prioritization, and alignment, I certainly would like to see some color as to which programs are attracting the state's best students, which of our colleges and which of our campuses are, what the highest demand programs from the most prepared students are, because as you just said, Dr. Cruzado, we have to make it a successful environment for all of our students, and one thing we know is that the best students, the smartest students in the classroom elevate the expectations for everybody else there. So with that October event coming up and continuing the prioritization conversation, I certainly would like to see some color as to who and what within our campuses is attracting, the reasons we're seeing more of those students look at our system as an option. Thank you.
Thank you. Further questions or comments from members of the board? Okay, then. Thank you, Mr. Chair. I think that concludes our work. Do we want to hear, would any of our community colleges like to visit with us?
Excuse me if I may, Madam Chair. I think that, am I wrong, Mr. Robinson? Didn't we ask if the community colleges would be represented by one of their presidents to make a few comments about their situation? Is this the time? Maybe it was a different time.
Yes, President Hickswell.
She is. If she's, I think she's prepared to make a few comments. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chair, members of the Regents. MCC has also embarked on a strategic budgeting process, excuse me, to tie our budget into our strategic needs. As you all know, we have a statutorily mandated funding formula which makes community colleges different than the Montana University System units, where we have a variable cost of education at 75% of our budget, of the formula, and then a fixed cost, a variable cost at 25% which is multiplied by our FTE. And then we have that fixed cost, which is at 75%. And those two variables are added together to give us our cost of education factor, which is then multiplied by a percent state share that is determined every legislative session. So it becomes quite complex, and then as we add in our local dollars, as Deputy Commissioner Robinson talked about earlier, some of the metrics, you may have some questions on some of those metrics because the metrics become apples and oranges sometimes when we're looking at them, comparing them even to ourselves amongst community colleges as well as the other two-year colleges in the state. Also, as Deputy Commissioner Robinson pointed out, we do not participate in the long-range building program. Our building funds come from those local dollars. And so plant expenditures and O&M and deferred maintenance are locally funded. Miles Community College is not eligible for bonding. We don't have the bonding capacity because we're so small, nor does our school district. And so that adds an additional challenge when it comes to our funding, and the stimulus money really did help us. We were able to replace 40-year-old carpet, 40-year-old windows, 40-year-old heating system in our facilities, and Regent Robinson and Commissioner Stearns were on our campus recently, and Commissioner Stearns' driver commented on the sticker that we have outside of our door. Where is he in here? The sticker that we have on the outside of our door that says, "Please remove your spurs and cleats upon entering the building." It's because I want to take care of my new carpet. I may not get new carpet for another 40 years. Miles Community College has also increased our investment related to instruction. You saw on the metrics that we are currently at 63.6. When I first came, that number was below 50%. Also, just to let you know, with our conversion to Banner, those dollar amounts have been coded under instructional or institutional support rather than instructional support, and that's something that we can certainly discuss to see what would be most appropriate under NACUBO rules for where to put those costs relative to this conversion. I also want to point out some numbers. It looks like our enrollment is going to be up about 1%. We have, looks like 4 more students enrolled after the 3rd week. You know how there's so much flex time in the first 3 weeks. So it's looking like we're going to have about a 1% increase. The metric that I'm really proud of is the fact that 80% of our applicants enrolled this fall. So that met our goal, and that shows that our enrollment management plan is working. We have also implemented some initiatives relative to the completion agenda, and you saw some of those metrics earlier. The NGEMS completed a Complete College America report earlier this spring, and our IPEDS data from last year showed that our graduation rates are 69%. So I've been joking in our community about asking people how we beat the Bobcats and the Grizz. So Dr. Cruzado mentioned their graduation rates, and certainly community colleges have different metrics than the university system, but I'm very proud of the initiatives that we've put in place which have increased our retention and graduation rates. Our retention rates were also listed at 76% on that IPEDS report. As a result, we were nominated for the Aspen Award, which is a national award that is recognizing community colleges for improving their outcomes related to the completion agenda. And that was very exciting to be nominated. We were one of 120 community colleges to be nominated for that award. The award committee narrowed it down to 10, and we unfortunately weren't among those 10. But as we look at what those 10 colleges are that are competing as to be a finalist for that $1 million award, we are doing some of the things that they are doing and very similar. Some of the initiatives that we've put in place include required orientation, mandatory placement, required prerequisites, no late registration, intrusive advising, and early warning systems. And those things are working together with the academic initiatives we've put in place for institutional integrity, which has, much to the chagrin of my Vice President for Student Affairs, it has decreased our FTE slightly because no longer is our Chief Academic Officer allowing multiple times to take a PE class, for example. She has required all of our classes to have outcomes objectives as stated in the syllabus and that they must be accomplished. So courses that don't meet her criteria are not allowed to be in the catalog and on the schedule. And so that has increased our academic integrity, which drives up our graduation rate and success of our students. So I'm very proud of what our campus has been able to do, and certainly welcome to answer any questions.
Thank you, Dr. Hickswa. Are there questions or comments from members of the board? Madam Commissioner.
Just one question. We suggested perhaps on a 3-year rotation that each of the community colleges could have this moment, but certainly we would welcome comments from the other 2 colleges if there were particular issues, budgets that they wanted to call attention to. If not, you'll certainly get your place in the sun next year and the year after. It sounds very good, Stephanie. I just would like to convey my congratulations to you and to all of you.
Thank you. And that concludes now, I think, our budget agenda for today, Mr. Chair. Oh, President Engstrom.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I wanted to make just one additional comment as an example, as an illustration of sort of the ongoing internal allocation decisions that we have to make. And the example I want to use is the library. It's at the core of our business, academic work. And so library materials have undergone, in one way, a really revolutionary change recently. We now have access to online materials that really have expanded the overall information base that our students and faculty have to work with by making available to them many more journals and reference materials than in the past when it was all hard copy. But the cost of library materials escalates at 7 to 8% per year. And when we do the present law adjustment calculation that Deputy Commissioner Robinson coordinates, that number gets built into that present law adjustment, 7 or 8%. Well, we haven't really received any present law adjustment in the last several years. And so that 7 or 8% inflation in library costs keeps marching on. And we have not been willing to make a 7 or 8% cut in library acquisitions each year. So we've had to move money around to maintain the integrity of that library. And over a multiple year period, that is a significant amount of money given the total library budget. So that's just one example that I wanted to make sure that you heard, because libraries are so essential to what we are about as academic institutions, that we just have to make sure that we maintain their integrity, and that is just an ongoing discussion that we have in our budget considerations. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. President. Are there other comments from members of the board? Either of the campus presidents? Then we'll now move to public comment on any of the items on the budget agenda. Okay, seeing none then, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Regent McLean. I think we're right on schedule to go ahead and break for lunch. We have board members' lunch meeting with the students upstairs in the Beartooth room, and we should reconvene at 1 o'clock with the Academic Research and Student Affairs Committee.